4 witnesses. I appreciate, your questions. I know you'll keep them brief, but I know you'll do what you need to do and do your job. So our first panel is we're at House Bill 579, SAFE, Donna Edwards, Kelly Schultz, Michael Sanderson, and Josh Levi. Wait, are Kelly and Donna up there on the same panel?
We are. Yes,
Okay,
we are.
Yes, got extraordinarily confused. I thought yeah. I know there's another Donna Edwards.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, it's partnership.
Is that what it is? All right. We'll see. Go ahead, Safe.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and the member of Economic Matters Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of the Governor's Bill, House Bill 579, Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity and Related Approvals, Definition of Generating Stations, otherwise known as the Critical Infrastructure Streamlining Act of 2024. For the record, I'm Saif Ratul, the Deputy Legislative Officer for Governor Westmore. The first year of the Moore-Miller administration has been a success story in both economic as well as environmental aspects. We have experienced the creation of 4,000 new jobs, the lowest unemployment rate in the nation for 5 months straight. We have made significant investment in renewable energies, including the offshore wind, thanks to Delegate Charkoudian and the members here, and incentivizing electric vehicle structure across the state. Maryland started to make its mark as well. Baltimore region last year was recognized as the federally designated national tech hub that will attract emerging technologies in Maryland, garner hundreds of millions of jobs, and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment and tens of thousands of jobs. However, the past decade tells a different story for the state of Maryland. Our economic growth has been underperformed the country, and the state lost crucial workforce, and businesses consistently overlooked the state as they considered investing into a new area. This unpredictable nature of Maryland's regulatory landscape can be directly attributed to this narrative. And this was on display last fall when the Public Service Commission's decision to deny backup generators used for emergency purposes only, citing climate concerns that created further uncertainty and prevented a novel industry from investing in Maryland. It is essential that Maryland find the right balance between our need for a strong environmental and labor standards and our need to grow our economy. This bill intends to intended to right that decision and restore the appropriate balance between these two important goals. This is a fuel agnostic and an industry neutral bill that aims to streamline the needs for 21st century critical infrastructure industries. First, the bill defines emergency backup generating stations that are used exclusively for on-site emergency backup purposes in the event of a power outage. Second, test and maintenance operations to ensure functionality, installed with equipment that prevents the flow of electricity to the electric grid, and subject to MD's permitting process. In addition, the bill provides a statutory exemption from the CPCN process for any combination of 2 or more generating units used exclusively for on-site emergency backup purposes in an event of a power outage. This bill does not propose any significant deviation from the state's current practices for those emergency generators. It simply provides certainty by streamlining the regulatory process. Emergency backup generators and the facilities that they serve will still be subject to important permitting and licensing requirements, including permits related to air quality, water quality, construction and sediment control, local zoning requirements, and much more. The bill aims to emphasize the environmental enforcement mechanisms that Maryland Department of Environment has through their regulatory process and have been the practice before this bill was introduced. So what does this process include? MD is authorized to regulate these backup generators for emergency purposes that includes air permits to construct, pollution sources and emission reviews, and these are required to be federally certified to operate on site. Maryland's major source air permit also requires extensive public engagement and community input as well on the process. MD, through their broad regulatory authority, is also allowed to impose additional requirements on these generators depending on the project, such as required to use Tier 4 generators that are known to be more efficient and equipped with the latest technology, limiting hours of operation, limiting premises-wide emissions, and limiting fuel consumptions, to name a few. These permits are required demonstration of continuous compliance that include thorough record keeping, inspections, and consistent audits. These are crucial steps in place to protect the community and support our economic investment. In addition, the bill highlights the input that local jurisdictions have in the process of approving or denying industries that are planning to invest in that local area. The bill aims to remove the uncertainty and barriers to the growth of Maryland's technology infrastructure while bolstering the state's economic competitiveness. Maryland Tech Council projects tens of millions of dollars of local revenue that could be used for our education, transportation, public safety, environment, and climate resiliency projects. This will create thousands of good-paying jobs, and these investments are crucial to revive our main streets as well as our state. The bill is focused on backup generators only that are being used for testing or emergency purposes when there's a power outage. These emergency backup generators are being used in various other facilities or industries such as hospitals, biopharma technologies, tech industries, casinos, of course, data centers, to name a few. And to put into perspective, specifically for the data center industry, the project that initially started this conversation in Frederick County at full build capacity for all of those backup generators will usage for a year will be equivalent of 153 school buses that are on our road every day. So simply put, this bill aims to restore that appropriate balance between our commitment to strong environmental standards and our need for economic development. With that, I respectfully request a favorable committee report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO, and we are 100% behind HB 579. Businesses investing in Maryland's critical infrastructure need predictability. Labor needs high road, sustainable jobs. HB 579 do both. We're excited because this is being built on a site where the Alcao plant used to be. Those were 600 union jobs and all the jobs that were surrounding it. So we can finally build back a community that has lost its infrastructure. Over 15 years, this is going to be 48,000 good construction jobs. It's going to have a pipeline of training local people into our electrician and other trades. It is going to have at least 1,700 permanent jobs. It is going to build the community back. It is going to create a middle class and help grow our economy in Western Maryland. We hope to see that what this outcome really begins is to build the pipeline further west so that we can have better jobs in the supply chain and the growth during this data center growth and construction. I know some people will go, oh, they're talking about union jobs. Unions built the middle class, and you need high-skilled labor to show up every day and to build these data centers and maintain them. We're doing it all across the country. We're proud of our work, and we definitely want the support and a favorable report for House Bill 579. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I'm Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties, also here in support of this bill. I'll take you back a little ways. Many of you have come to MACO conferences in the past, and one of the things we like to do is build out a panel talking about a current issue, especially an unresolved issue that affects counties, but affects Maryland, is bigger than us. Sometimes we try to punch above our weight. And this topic with data centers as the beginning of how does Maryland welcome and fit around a more modern and tech-focused economy was one of the topics we brought up. Brought in the Department of the Environment and Public Service Commission, leadership from Frederick County. When you hear about data centers, they're kind of the test case. I don't think you could leave that room after an hour-long conversation on this topic without feeling like there's got to be a way to thread the needle for us to be smart, to still be smart environmental stewards and have sensible energy policy, but also to see that something like this that's built for backup and occasional use is different than a full-time generator. What I want to mention about the bill is the context for these projects. This is something that's not in the bill, but it's in existing law and process and would still be there for these kind of projects going forward. This is not simply a get out of jail free card. These projects of the kind of things we're talking about are still going to have tons of community input and tons of public participation. You're going to go through some sort of rezoning, even if it's in your industrial site. You're going to need a water permit. This is going to be a water using facility. You need a water appropriation permit. There's a public participation process for that. Subdividing and so forth requires community input, and your planning commission is going to have a say on siting these facilities. You're going to have input from the public and input from the community. This bill is about making sure that when we look at it for energy purposes, we're doing so with some reality check. Urge a support on the bill, and we're grateful for the administration's support.
Thank you and good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby and members of this great committee. For the record, I am Kelly Schultz and I'm the CEO of the Maryland Tech Council. The Maryland Tech Council is a nearly 800 member strong advocates for policies to strengthen Maryland's economy and competitiveness. We support this bill because of its potential to help position Maryland as a leader in the growth of the digital economy. If passed, this bill will help to ensure that new facilities like data centers do not face unnecessarily restrictive barriers. An example of the way in which the digital economy could transform Maryland is the planned data center campus sited at the old East Elko smelting plant in Frederick County. This facility has the potential to put Frederick County on the map of America's digital economy. The Tech Council commissioned a study on this facility to determine the full scale of the potential impact. The study found that the construction of this facility would support approximately 48,000 jobs directly and secondarily in the county from 2023 through 2038, or about 3,000 jobs per year, $3.1 billion in local labor income, and $25.8 million in county tax revenues. Once fully operational, this facility will support an estimated 6,300 direct and indirect jobs in Frederick County annually, including 1,700 directly on the campus, with an average of $65,000 per worker wages on the campus. Frederick County would receive $41 million in tax revenues annually. This project is a once-in-a-generation chance to revitalize an abandoned industrial site into a modern, environmentally friendly digital campus that powers our regional economy. There are similar opportunities for economic revitalization around the state with similar impacts on jobs and tax revenue. We urge a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Josh Levy. I am president of the Data Center Coalition, or DCC, a membership association of leading data center owners and operators. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and to speak in support of HB 579. Data centers provide essential digital infrastructure that supports public safety, healthcare, government services, distance learning, remote work, exchange of news and urgent information, e-commerce, and so many other technologies central to our daily lives. Due to the essential nature of their operations, data centers must ensure their ability to maintain uninterrupted operations, to provide access to essential data and services for their customers, end users, and the general population every minute of every day. In 2020, Maryland joined more than 25 states by establishing an economic development program that provides tax exemptions for qualifying data center equipment purchases, similar to tax policies extended to manufacturers in 41 other states. This sent a strong signal that Maryland is seeking to bring digital infrastructure investment to the state. Regulatory certainty also is important to making this investment a reality, and that's what this bill provides. By prioritizing investments in local communities, data centers catalyze supply chain and service ecosystems. They create jobs for hundreds of construction workers on a site as individual facilities are built. They provide quality, high-wage jobs to support their ongoing operations. Data centers also support schools, charities, and other community organizations where their teams live and work. Like all businesses that make large infrastructure investments, regulatory certainty and consistency are important criteria in siting and decision-making. We are very appreciative of Governor Moore's leadership in sponsoring HB 579, and we encourage the committee to act favorably on this legislation to ensure predictability and consistency in regulatory decision-making to advance economic development in Maryland. Thank you.
Chair, just a quick question. I would consider this a clean energy bill, wouldn't you?
Sir, this bill is directed towards emergency backup generators. So I wouldn't technically say yes or no on that question.
But in order to meet our clean energy goals, we're going to need something to back up the process we're going through. This will be something that I would say would augment that and be a plus. That's been one of the downsides of clean energy has been what happens if, and this would help that. Am I correct?
This will provide certainty for industries that are reliant upon constant stream of energy in case of a power outage. So consider a simpler example would be hospitals, right? They need consistent stream of energy. In case of a power outage, we need to have something that turns on those electricity and those life-saving infrastructures at a moment's notice.
I understand. I think this is a backup and it's essential. And I'm wondering, like, we look at clean energy and we're moving in that direction. And you see the resistance for this bill is from people like the Sierra Club and Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. With this is going to promote and help us move forward in the direction we're going to. What can I say to them when they come to my office saying, why would you do this?
One thing is that for individuals, coalitions, and others who have significant environmental concerns, this bill does not alleviate or remove any of those environmental protections that Maryland Department of Environment, through their regulatory process, currently oversees. Those regulatory processes includes for backup generators, focusing on what level or what type of generators that they could use depending on the project size or how much fuel that they can consume, right? So there's a lot of guardrails that are already set up through the MD's regulatory process, in addition to community engagement. Donna?
I would also point out that California, and we know that California is a state renowned for its air quality standards. California's Air Resource Board actually recognizes the need for diesel generation in the emergency sources of power, and they have granted blanket exemptions to its airborne toxic control measures during emergency times and when shutoffs.
I'm not against the bill. I'm just asking because I'm getting confronted with this and I see the value in it because we're going to have something to do. But thank you for the.
Thank you, delegates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is, I guess, mostly for Mr. Levy. So I like the idea of the jobs. I like the idea of the high-tech sector. I like the idea of the infrastructure advancements. I'm good on all of that. I think it's great. My question for you is, how much electricity generally does these data centers, in your experience, use? The ones around the country, ones that you're familiar with. What kind of electrical demand is going to take place as far as the grid and utilities are concerned from a generation perspective?
I very much appreciate the question, and I think the answer is just unfortunately going to be that it tremendously varies depending on the facility, but also depending on the servers that are inside a particular facility and the type of workload that they are carrying. Certainly, data centers that have servers that are doing machine learning, artificial intelligence, other types of workloads will be more energy intensive, for example, than data centers that have, data storage and other processing functions taking place. Likewise, different companies will deploy data centers differently in terms of the number of buildings, the size of the buildings, and the power consumption, and also the types of cooling that's employed within those facilities. So I just find that to be a challenging question to answer in the aggregate.
Let me ask this then, maybe that'll make it a little easier. In your experience in the data centers that have been erected, for lack of a better term, and that are operational, are there examples of those data centers where there is a component, even a small component, that generates and stores any electricity on site, as opposed to relying on the grid to generate all the electricity you use? In other words, do you have any solar or any generation or storage at all?
I am aware of.
Even in the smallest bit, do you have any?
Yeah, in the smallest bit, most data centers have what's called uninterrupted power supplies, which provide power in the event of a utility glitch or a very temporary outage before any kind of backup generation would occur. Likewise, there are some data centers that are co-located with those kinds of generation facilities. But primarily what you're seeing in the industry now is a lot of innovative approaches to trying to essentially deploy different types of architecture and different solutions to see what might work best at scale. But at the moment, again, that answer is going to vary depending on the architecture and the facilities in question, sir.
Are you opposed to any kind of backup being battery storage, or any kind of generation being, even if it's limited, some solar?
Well, I believe that one of the things that is really positive about this legislation is the fact that it is agnostic in terms of the technology, in terms of the fuel and the type of backup generation deployed. And I think that allows for that kind of innovation to take place here in Maryland, along with other places where you're seeing those kinds of pilots.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. I've had a chance to have conversations about this bill with many of you. And I appreciate, Safe, your comments about finding the right balance, and Michael, your comments about threading the needle. And I gotta say, I'm struggling with this bill, so I just want to put out a couple of thoughts and give you a chance to respond. And the reason I'm struggling is I think that we have I think that we need data centers to function. I think that we should have them in Maryland, primarily because of the jobs that they create. That's the thing that is most attractive to me about them, the union jobs that they create. I hope that they all commit to prevailing wage. So those are the reasons that we want them, and we want to do this. What I'm struggling with is that we are, in fact, removing a significant process that we have in place to protect the environment. And I appreciate that where it's coming from is a sense of regulatory certainty. I understand that goal. My hope would be, if we're trying to thread the needle and find the right balance, my hope would be that we would add something else with it. Like, we would be saying, we're going to remove this requirement and streamline this process, because I understand why it is that you think that has to happen. And to balance that, because data centers do use a lot of energy, and because this will add to emissions. It absolutely will. It's not massive, but it will add to emissions. Having 50 hours, 100 hours, whatever the testing is, 5,000 megawatts, it will add to emissions. So my request, as you know, and what I've been trying to find out, is what are the ways that we can actually create a balance, a real balance. So we want data centers. We're willing to give them this streamlined process. In exchange, we want them to add some battery storage to the grid. In exchange, not necessarily for backup. I understand battery storage isn't ready for prime time as backup, but some battery storage, 1%, 5%. In exchange, we want them to buy Maryland offshore wind, because that's a climate goal that we have in the state. So if we're going to kind of back off on our climate goals in one end, maybe we add to our climate goals on the other end. And so I'm just like, those are some of the thoughts that I've had. That's what I've got in another bill. I'd rather tie it to this bill. But I think that I'm hearing you talk about threading the needle. I'm hearing you talk about that balance. I definitely want regulatory certainty for all businesses, including solar, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think that I'm afraid that this isn't the balance, because I'm afraid it goes in one direction and it doesn't have the other piece. And I just am trying to find the way that we can create that regulatory certainty and get and get the good union jobs and get the other a contribution towards our climate goals at the same time. And so I just wonder if you want to say for anyone up there more about not just maybe someday there'll be battery storage if we innovate, but like how we do something right now that actually gets this balance.
Sure, Delegate, thank you for
No,
this
it's a question.
question. I know you and I, we had a number of conversations about this. And this bill is very narrowly focused on a specific aspect of generators that are only usage for as a backup during a power outage. However, you brought up a point that is more broader to look at the broader picture about these novel industries, including data centers, that will require a lot more evaluation. So the administration itself is committed to have those conversations and those partnership with relevant agencies, relevant stakeholders, and assembly members as well, in terms of responding to those broader public policy risk questions rather, and those solutions as well. One of the things that we can look into is the inclusive process that Frederick County has put forth under the county exec Fitzwater's leadership. That is doing some incredible work in terms of looking at those perfect balances when we're looking about economic competitiveness, job growth, our commitment to preserving our environment and such. So we'd love to collaborate on the broader impact for this for data center industries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for the testimonies. I want to ask Safe first. Could you comment on Maryland's competitiveness in data center presence? Because I want to know and provide some context nationally where we are, right? What we have to support the kind of industries we want to grow in our state, especially the elite level data centers. And if you are on that subject, if you don't mind talking about whether the administration is already or intends to be working with those existing data centers to make sure that over time they transition to cleaner energy sources, as all industries will have to at one point or another. Because we all heard statistics over the years about how 70% of the world's internet traffic travels through Loudoun County in particular, East Coast. And Montgomery County at one point even dug through underneath the Potomac River to connect with that part of the river in order to, connect with that source. So I would love to have you comment on that. And then for Mako, I wonder if Mr. Sanderson could comment on local control of zoning issues, because even if we pass legislation, that tends to be a big sticking point when it comes to things like that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Delegate. So in terms of competitiveness around data centers in the state, General Assembly, members here had passed the tax credit in 2020. That was a signal to the industry that Maryland is willing to house this novel industry and technology in the state. Since then, we have seen some movement, right? There are a number of different smaller data center facilities that here and there are a few that are being built, but largely we haven't been able to attract the more bigger facilities, right? That ultimately that tax credit was intended for, to expedite that process a little bit more, incentivize businesses to come here, but bring on not 200 jobs, but 2,000 jobs or more. So in terms of a specific number or around Maryland's competitiveness, comparing it to our neighboring states, I'm not sure if Josh Levi has that number, but we can definitely get that number for you. And in terms of the second question, Delegate, we want these businesses to come here in Maryland. We want these businesses to come and, help us grow not only just our economy, but help us be the 21st century, technological revolution that Maryland aims to do. That requires a much broader conversation for us to have in terms of what is needed here. And we want to manage all of those issues surrounding these facilities and surrounding this industry as a whole. And that cannot be a conversation just in silos. So we are eager, as I was mentioning to Delegate Cherkoudian, to have those conversations with not only just stakeholders here, but also stakeholders at the local level who are going to play a significant role in housing these facilities in their own jurisdiction. Michael?
Thank you for the question, Delegate. On this matter of local zoning and approval authority and so forth, I mean, I have a biased hat, but this goes back before even my time with MACO. I've been doing this for a long time, but for decades and decades, Maryland has said zoning and land use ought to be in the hands of the communities for that kind of input at that local level, for the most part. And you carve out specific exceptions to that, like for large-scale energy production. In the interest of having sufficient energy on the grid, you don't want to leave the overall capacity to generate electricity and energy to the whims of local communities. And so the whole process for power plants originally turned into the CPCN process through the PSC, where they keep an eye on overall adequacy of energy supply for everyone, rather than thinking at the community level. What this bill says is you've made that general off-ramp for local input, but these kind of facilities being evaluated as if they are grand scale generators is probably unfair, because the generation is there on a temporary emergency basis only, not meant to be an overall supplier to the grid. No matter how many individual backup units you stitch together into one project, they're still not meant to be run every day, all day long, and so forth. So as a matter of local input and siting, this bill leaves intact all those community sensitivities on where they go and that sort of stuff. This bill is really focused on the state level approval and says this isn't really a candidate for the same treatment as a new nuclear plant or oil burning plant or coal building plant or something like that.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. Just a couple questions. So we passed the Climate Solutions Now bill in 2022. So there was obviously an urgency to moving that forward. So I have a couple questions, and then whoever wants to address that. So it sounds like in streamlining this process, we're really moving those goals forward by addressing some of those concerns quickly. My second question would be just to clarify, you know, MDE is very concerned, obviously, about the environment in the state of Maryland. So they're on board with this. So they're very comfortable moving forward quickly and streamlining the process. My other question would be, looking at the budget situation that we are facing by getting this online quickly. And I know, Kelly, you addressed a lot of stats, and I tried to jot them down quickly. What would be the benefit to us as a state with the jobs created, putting this online and bringing tax money into the state? And then I guess my last comment would be, if we were bringing that many jobs to the Frederick area, and that we could have more people with a smaller commute that are maybe traveling to DC, Baltimore, Northern Virginia, wouldn't that also benefit the environment? So those are my basic thoughts, and would happy to listen to any of your answers.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Delegate. So, you know, the administration is extremely committed to meeting our Climate Solution Now Act's goal that would reduce 60% of greenhouse gas emission by 2031. Earlier or late last year, Maryland Department of Environment has submitted their plan or pathway plan, how to do that and what level of funding mechanism that looks like. Speaking of which, you know, Maryland, given that our stagnant economic growth for last decade or so, as it has been articulated through the Comptroller's report, you know, we are in need to have new and novel industries and new businesses to come into the state that will allow us to create skilled, high-paying jobs, as well as significant investment within that state and within that community. With that being said, the second part of the question, you know, level of environment, MDE's ability to protect our environment and safeguard our communities as well as reach our goals. MDE has significant broad authority to impose a number of different requirements for backup generators through their permitting process. You know, a few of them that I've earlier mentioned, it could require, depending on how big that project is, require them to purchase and utilize tier 4 generators, which have more emission reduction equipments associated with that. It could provide or require additional controls on their permits, such as limiting hours of operation for testing and maintenance purposes, limiting the premise-wide emissions, limiting how much fuel that will consume on a yearly basis. And largely, a lot of those emergency generators are generally limited no more than 100 hours per calendar year to conduct testing and maintenance operations, right? So there's a lot of regulatory authority that we have depending on the level of project and depending on the type of generators that will safeguard those communities in that matter. Kelly?
Yeah, and thank you, Delegate, for the question about the jobs. And I hope that in our written testimony, you got a copy of the economic impact study, so you don't have to continue to jot those numbers down. So if they are not included, I'll make sure that they get to the committee for that. But I think what we saw, and I sat on the Frederick County work group for data centers that County Executive Fitzwater did. And so I think it was really important to look back on the 7 months of work as we looked at sustainability, siting locations, and economic impact. And the county will still have all of that control with sustainability and siting to make sure that all of those important aspects of the permitting and zoning areas are taken into respect. But I will also say that at every single one of our public meetings, we had between probably 5 and 12 members of the local IBEW, Frederick County residents, that were in attendance at those meetings. All of them had just pulled in from their jobs in Loudoun County. Right. So that is like the immediate impact. That is the what's so about what this can do in Maryland, whether it's Frederick County or another county. I think that's really important to know. But we've talked about the impact for the local jurisdiction at full build out would be around $41 million. And in the policy statement or the impact statement, you'll see that it's probably a very conservative number. But at full build out and operating phase, the state per year will receive about $197 million a year from the impact. And that's in your, and that's just this one facility in Frederick County. So when we talk about the sales tax, electricity taxes, income taxes, and some real property that kind of diminishes and mostly goes to the county proceeds revenues as opposed to the state during that transition. But there is real advantages. And also, I think is important to understand that there has been questions about costs for this as well. And it's important to know that at that East Alcoa site, having this with very minimal impact on the number of children that would need to go to schools because of the low on-site employees, you would not have an impact on the local school districts. You would not have an impact on the local transportation or road clogging, congestion. So the impact is really great as far as positivity. Thank you.
If I can offer just a quick item that hasn't been touched on, but your question about this economic development policy and how it abuts our environmental policy and energy policy and so forth. One thing you haven't heard yet is this site in Frederick County is a brownfield site. So we're talking about a place that's all but been written off to be put into any kind of productive use because so many things are bad fits. So instead of this whole new facility going into some untouched land and a bunch of clear cutting trees and so forth to use it, we're going to take a dead spot and bring it to life with this project, with all these jobs and all this vitality. Like that's what we want and as we balance those things, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Let me start by saying, as somebody who works for the world's largest data and cloud company, that I've seen how data centers can truly transform regions across the country and states as a whole. So I commend the administration for their leadership here on trying to bring Maryland's competitiveness up in the nation. But I kind of want to reframe the argument back to kind of the basics of what the bill, at least from the administration standpoint, is trying to do here. We're still talking about backup generation for only emergency times, right?
That's correct.
We're not talking about generation that's going to just fuel the entire data center, right?
No.
Okay. And how often do you think they have to turn on in a year?
It truly depends on the type of generators that are utilized, but they will have to run regular test and maintenance to make sure those generators are working. And on average, at the ceiling level, MD's permitting process, they will, put a cap on about 100 hours a year, a calendar year, but all of that varies depending on the type and other factors that associated with that specific project.
And last question here, we talked a lot about the economic benefits, and trust me, again, as you know, in my personal life, my personal capacity, I truly understand that. But I haven't heard a lot about the environmental impacts. And as you all know, we have very lofty goals here in the state in terms of getting to a better place with our environment. Has there been an environmental impact assessment on what this means for the environment? And how do you respond if you look at the committee testimony? A lot of the opposition is from those folks who are in the environmental justice community. How does the administration respond to a lot of the opposition that we're going to hear from shortly?
Sure. So in terms of the permitting process, MD with the broad authority looks over a number of different things that ultimately analyzes what level of impact and what level of factors they will impose on those projects, right? It goes back, it's a little uncertain right now. And one thing I should mention is that while we're talking about this one project in Frederick County, this industry, the goal for us to be allocated in a lot of the other brownfields in various parts of the state, right? Whether that is in Southern Maryland, whether that is in Prince George's County, Eastern Shore, a number of different things. So all of those will have much more significant and very different environmental impacts depending on those communities. So something that County Exec Fitzwater's team is doing right now for Frederick specific is working through and identifying all of those impact, not only just environmental, but all the other on the grid as well. What does that process looks like? And they are to provide a report based off of their projects and their findings, I believe in March. So, or a little bit later than that. So we're happy to provide that information to you down the road as well. But again, these are unique projects. No two are alike. So for us to create a one size that fits all could be very problematic.
Great, thank you. And just make sure you keep Prince George's in mind as we move forward here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the benefits of getting called on last is that everyone's already answered the majority of my questions, so that's a good thing. So look, it's very rare, in my opinion, that we have so many different groups coming in together in support of a same bill, particularly in this committee. I mean, we have the administration, we have labor, we have the industry, business community, we have MACO. A lot of the benefits, the upside to this has been talked about. I wanted to just address some of the concerns that I've heard here and maybe come up. And I know Delegate Boafo mentioned that this is backup only, emergency only. These things aren't running 24/7. This is as if someone's on life support at a hospital, the power goes out. Instead of letting the patient die, the generator kicks on until the power comes back on. The other thing too is that there's nothing in this bill that prohibits the industry as more reliable backup power generators that maybe are not diesel come online in the future. This doesn't prohibit, this data center campus potentially in Frederick or in other places from then transitioning to those systems. There's nothing in this legislation that stops that innovation or that prohibits them from doing that. And I would imagine you'd be doing that now if those options were available. So if we could just touch on that, because I know most of the opposition is coming from the concerns related to the environment. And again, we talked about this is backup only, emergency only, but just on those generators alone, I know there's companies out there working on this technology. They're working to improve the reliability, the affordability of it. So this doesn't stop any of that, correct?
No. I'm just going to tell you about that kind of like the overarching picture as it is to innovation and technology. And data centers is just, the tip of the iceberg when it comes to some of these innovative ways for battery storage, like the delegate had mentioned, and different ways to provide clean energy sources. From my experience, and I have talked with data center companies, some that perhaps Delegate Buffalo may be familiar with, all over the country, and their desire is to be able to create a cheaper climate-friendly energy base for their facilities. I think that there was a lot of lessons learned. We learned a lot of lessons when the Loudoun County folks came to talk to us. And I believe that the industry has seen that as, they are the largest global and geographical area of data centers on the planet. And I think it's really important for us to know that lessons have been learned from that. The industry wants to be able to be that good, clean energy partner. They want to be able to purchase renewable energy, and we have to give them in the technology the ability to catch up with what those desires are, because I think that that is truly the path in which they're going to lead. And I have a feeling you're going to hear from perhaps some individuals from the industry that can talk about their environmental backgrounds and how significant it is to them to be that good, clean energy partner within the state.
So we still have all those options on the table as well. And
This doesn't take
Very
those away.
very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Finally, seeing no more questions, that concludes this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, we will go to the second panel, which is Rico, Mary Kane, and Pegeen Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Appreciate you guys allowing us to be here today. My name is Rico Albuquerque. I'm here with IBW Local 24. It's the electrical workers in Baltimore. I came here to talk about jobs. I feel like you guys have heard about that at length from the previous panel. So I do want to highlight 2 points, and you touched on it a little bit, the delegate. It's not often you see the Chamber of Commerce and a labor union testifying on the same panel. So hopefully that emphasizes what we feel the economic opportunity is for this site. One more thing that I want to mention, I've heard a lot of times these jobs talked about as temporary. We're talking about 15 years to build out a site. I've only been an electrician for 15 years, and I don't know what we consider a short-term or a long-term job, but I don't think of 15 years as being short-term or being temporary, and that's just the build out of the site. That doesn't take into account the thousands of workers that will be there maintaining the site and staffing the data centers. So for those reasons, I ask for you to vote favorably on HB 579.
Dear Chairman Crosby and members of the committee, I am Mary Kane, and I'm the president of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, a statewide organization of more than 6,800 members and federated partners. And I'm very happy to be here with my colleagues from the unions. Our mission is to develop and promote strong public policy that ensures sustained economic growth for Maryland businesses, their employees, and our families. So this bill, HB 579, would exempt backup generators from the definition of generating station within the CPCN process in Maryland. And it represents a crucial step towards removing barriers to the growth of Maryland's technology sector. And we believe it will have far-reaching positive impacts on our economy and our resilience. The legislation streamlines the regulatory process for industries reliant on backup power generators, particularly in critical sectors such as data centers and hospitals. HB 579 will ensure Maryland remains competitive in the rapidly evolving global economy. In this legislation, it is clear that the CPCN process will be kept in place for what is intended to do, which is to permit electrical power generation facilities like power plants and high voltage transmission lines. It is also evident that emergency backup generation used for emergency power generation should not be subject to the same process for power plants. Moreover, the bill ensures the essential regulatory processes by local governments and the Maryland Department of the Environment, including air permits, remain intact. Many critical processes in hospitals, data centers, and other industries rely on continuous power supply. More recently, Baltimore was named a federal tech hub as part of a highly competitive federal program, making the city eligible for hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. This is crucial for our growth in the technology community. We urge the committee to support this extraordinary opportunity for Baltimore and the state of Maryland by passing HB 579. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Peggy Townsend on behalf of the Maryland Hospital Association in strong support of this bill. We don't see it as an environmental bill or a jobs bill or economic development. This bill is about patient safety for hospitals. And I want to emphasize this is only for emergency situations. But these situations happen. The delegates from Montgomery County may remember about 2 years ago, a small plane crashed into some electrical power, and the power at MedStar Montgomery Medical Center went down. So it does happen. Those are the kind of things, but not often. But when it does, the impact to various aspects of hospital care are impact. Think life support equipment, ventilators, and the like, medical supply and vaccine refrigeration requirements, medical equipment, surgical equipment, facility power, occupational safety, electronic medical records, security systems, etc. So it really has the opportunity to impact so many different aspects of hospital care. I would note that we are heavily regulated with regard to backup power systems. We are required to have them be able to flip on in under 10 seconds. They're required to be able to operate for 96 hours. They're required to be inspected every week and tested every month. So we do take this very seriously. And for those reasons, we ask that you pass House Bill 579.
Mr. Chair, what's the largest backup that a hospital has? Do you know what the size is?
I don't know.
Because I looked into it and I asked MHA and I think it was like 1.5 to maybe 3 megawatts.
I think that's in the range that I've seen, but I don't know the average.
I think that's about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at the CPCN exemptions that hospitals have received and they're all in that zone. And so my second follow-up question is just, have you ever had trouble getting a CPCN exemption? Has the hospitals had trouble getting the exemptions?
We're about to find out. One hospital has a request pending at the PSC. The hearing is March 13th. So I don't have the answer to that. We have not to date, since this rule change or whatever they did came into it.
Yeah, no, well, you haven't. I mean, just because I looked at all the CPCN exemptions, but is it bigger than 70 megawatts that?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay, because I think that they said in the other decision that under 70 was the precedent that they were following. So I definitely wouldn't want a hospital to have any trouble getting, I mean, clearly, that's very important. It seems like it's a different scale. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next panel, Alan Schaefer, Charlotte Davis, Matthew Tetu, Kurt Snyder, Jesus. Kurt Snyder. I think that's all the favorites.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. My name is Alan Schaefer. I'm Executive Director of the Engine Technology Forum, a national educational association headquartered in Frederick, Maryland. Our membership includes manufacturers of internal combustion engines and equipment, including electric power generators. We thank Governor Moore for this initiative that will improve economic opportunity in Maryland without sacrificing environmental quality or local interest. A lot has been said about diesel generators already, and I'll just add a few remarks here. They are the gold standard for backup electrical power due to a unique combination of features, reliability, rapid response time, etc. They are everywhere in Maryland and around the country because of those factors today. A range of generators are available depending on the needs, with the exact specs being determined by engineering and design standards, health and safety code requirements, power needs of the facility, local environmental and other permitting requirements. As was mentioned earlier, the most advanced diesel generators available today, known as Tier 4, achieve near zero emissions for particulate matter and nitrogen oxide emissions. For traditional backup use at data centers, these are not generating stations putting power back into the grid and should not be required to go through the PSC process, as has been mentioned already. By far, the biggest environmental impact for data centers is not backup generators. Remember, they are not running most of the time. By far, the most significant environmental impact from data centers is the acquisition of electricity that they are using for prime power. We share the importance of taking measures to enhance our sustainability and reduce emissions of all kinds nationwide and in our community. We believe this bill will deliver that result to balance economic opportunity and environmental protection. We also know what happens when the power goes out and the internet goes down. Everything grinds to a halt. Our digital world today relies on data centers as their insurance, and backup generators are their insurance policy. They hope they'll never need them, but have them to protect your connectivity and our quality of life. We urge a favorable report on HB 0579. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Charlotte Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council. We're an independent state agency in the Maryland Department of Agriculture. I'm pleased to be here in support of House Bill 579. We have been proponents of expansion of data centers, particularly in rural areas, as we see those as an opportunity for rural economic development. They're bringing jobs, they're bringing good revenue for the local jurisdiction, things we desperately need in the rural areas. So we encourage your support of House Bill 579 so that we can be a leader in innovation in cyber technology and information technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Matt Defoe here on behalf of Chop Tank Electric Cooperative. I just want to say a simple me too. We need commercial growth on the Eastern Shore. It has been pretty stagnant since 2008. And we see data centers as a piece of that solution to bring economic growth and development to the Eastern Shore. So with that, we ask for a favorable report for House Bill 579. Thank you.
Chairman Wilson, committee members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Kurt Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Sheet Metal Contractors National Association, Mid-Atlantic Chapter. Our office is right down the road in Greenbelt, Maryland. I write today to express our strong support for House Bill 579. The addition of data centers within a scale development plan will bring jobs, tax credits, and revenue to Maryland, like previously mentioned. The positive economic impact to the state and the new technology corridor just west of us will be worth the investment. Smack in the Mid-Atlantic represents 22 construction firms, nearly 1,100 skilled union professionals. And our company's complete work per recognized technical standards widely accepted throughout the United States and Canada. On a different note, as a former Navy officer, many of my assignments were roles within engineering on multiple warships, including French warships. As a former chief engineer and engineering instructor for the Navy, the similar warship electrical systems utilized are very similar to a backup power generating station. These backup generators are closed loop systems. Again, no impact to the grid around them. Entirely separate from commercial or residential power grids of any kind, they will have their own fuel source, maintenance, and upkeep schedules like previously mentioned. This array of generators create their own power, not drawing from the grid. Remember, these are only for emergency power use only. They will not be running daily. These systems have proven to be reliable and safe. It is not uncommon to see hospitals, casinos, and other facilities with backup generating units. There is a large megawatt requirement per data center, but again, this is for limited contingencies only. Most importantly, House Bill 579, when approached properly, is an investment into technology, careers, and continued economic growth for Marylanders into the future. Please consider a favorable report for this very important bill. Thank you.
See no questions for this panel. Thank you guys very much. We have one favorable with amendments. Ms. Harbison.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kristen Harbison. I'm the political director for Maryland League of Conservation Voters, here to express our significant concerns on HB 579 as drafted. We understand the importance of the industries that support public health and safety, including the jobs they create and the expansion of technology hubs, which provide safe and reliable storage of data. We also remain committed to goals of climate emissions reduction and community engagement. To be very clear, we are not opposed to data centers. As drafted, however, this bill contradicts the goals set by the Maryland General Assembly and the Moore-Miller administration. We believe that the comprehensive assessment of climate and community impacts of diesel generators provided by the CPCN process are critical to principles of environmental justice, as well as to reaching our state goals of emissions reduction and protecting our public health. Despite these concerns, Maryland LCV is here in a position of favorable with amendments because we see a narrow path to making improvements to legislation that would mitigate these concerns. We direct you to our testimony for our amendments, which include creating important guardrails, incorporating public engagement and transparency, requirements for participation in our renewable energy goals, and a study to examine the issues raised by large, high energy use facilities with recommendations for best practices and mitigation. We look forward to working with the administration and this committee to find a path forward for this legislation. Unless significant changes are made to the bill before passage, however, Maryland LCV will be joining its partners in opposition to the legislation. Thank you very much.
Seeing no questions. Thank you very much, ma'am. Let's now move on to the unfavorables. Edward Steerley, Anna Griffith, James Ballard, and Josh Tolkien.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Sterling. I'm the resident of nearby Arnold, Maryland. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director for the National Parks Conservation Association. We're a nonprofit national organization that works to protect America's national parks. And I'm here today because we have very grave concerns about this bill. We are not opposed to data centers, but we are opposed to exempting the really important role that the Public Service Commission plays. It's very unique into taking into account kind of the macro level impacts to both environmental justice, to climate impacts, and creating a public process for us to engage in on projects that could cause, potential considerable air, water, and land use impacts that impact our national parks here in Maryland. Now, why am I here as a National Parks Group? Well, it's because several of the largest data center proposals that are being put forward are directly adjacent to C&O Canal National Historical Park or very close to Monocacy National Battlefield. We have seen in Virginia that land adjacent to and even within the congressionally authorized boundaries of national parks are those that are being sought after to be developed by the data center industry, which is causing irreparable harm now to some of our state and some of our nation's most treasured places. And I'm having a sense of deja vu because only a couple of years ago, I was constantly hearing the phrase, remember, it's only for emergency backup purposes. But then only a couple of weeks ago in the Virginia General Assembly, now we're debating whether these diesel generators are run continuously in times of grid strain, which is being sought after as state regulators there. So today I urge you for an unfavorable outcome, because before moving forward with reviewing any of the state's environmental review processes, that you first study really the comprehensive impacts and then determine what those regulatory guardrails should be before moving forward with changes today. We understand that these proposals have the significant to bring jobs and tax revenue and even more visitors to our national parks. But we also ask that you consider what these impacts might do to some of our national parks and public lands, because we owe that to those living who both visit those parks and live in the surrounding communities. So we look forward to working with you to ensure sustainable development in the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Anna Mudd, and I'm the Senior Policy Director for Potomac Conservancy. The data center that's been referenced several times today is located within the Potomac watershed, a watershed that supplies drinking water to over 3 million people. As my written testimony noted, we are opposed to this legislation for many reasons already cited by my colleague, but I will say we are open to amendments shared by Maryland LCV, specifically a study by the Public Service Commission that would study the impacts on water consumption and grid capacity. To be clear, we are not opposed to data centers, but we believe now is the time for us to get it right in Maryland. This is a great opportunity for Maryland to become a global leader in data center industry. We just want to make sure that we're not causing unforeseen consequences for communities in Frederick County and beyond. So thank you for your time, and please consider an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jim Ballard. I'm a retired professional engineer and FERC electrical engineering subject matter expert. And based on my electrical power engineering analysis and engineering economic evaluation of the data centers and the impacts on the grid, I find that the Maryland wealth will be there will be transfer of Maryland wealth of $1.5 billion to the surrounding PJM states through transmission costs and generation costs. This is just for 1,500 megawatts for the quantum loophole, and it may already be baked in. But you also are foregoing the opportunity to collect $23 million a year in PJM capacity market. Now, there's a nexus between these two numbers. Depending on how you collect that 23 million, you can reduce that 1.5 billion potentially down to zero. I think effectively you can only reduce maybe 1 billion of it unless you start building generation in state that will supply baseload capacity. Also, the quantum loophole initially will double the greenhouse gas emissions for Western Maryland. They're expected to grow to 5,000 megawatts by 2023. That's the only way that you can achieve the numbers that Ms. Schultz quoted to you. And there's also an article in the Data Center Dynamics where the quantum loophole projects that it may go to 10 gigawatts. So that's twice even that estimate. In addition, data centers will continually overload the grid, causing imports to overload in the PJM's power models, and they'll continually add to the system without stop. Unless you implement or you continue implementing the CPCN process. You don't want to be like Virginia. Virginia doesn't have it. If you get rid of it, you're going to be like Virginia.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Josh Tolkien on behalf of our 70,000 members and supporters. We urge a favorable report. I'm the director of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. As my colleagues have mentioned, our organizations and Sierra Club are not opposed to data centers. I myself use quite a bit of cloud computing. We're not opposed to regulatory certainty. I'd like to support this bill. I would have wanted to be up on this panel with my friends in organized labor and the governor's office. But we believe the pathway to regulatory certainty is not by exempting an entire source of pollution from regulation. There are more direct and more targeted ways to adjust our regulation. I heard a reference to MDE's air pollution regulations earlier. I have not seen any testimony from MDE assessing the environmental impact of this. What I do know is that MDE's regulatory authority limits itself to talking about the pollution from an individual generator, the type of it, or how often it could run, not the number of generators. That's what the CPCN does. It looks at macro scale, not individual generators supporting hospitals, but when those generators add up to 70 megawatts, that's when the scale of impact is something that we believe is prudent to require state level regulation. When I ran some calculations, 168 generators running at 100 hours per year as they're limited puts you at a scale of maybe a 6 to 8 megawatt diesel fired power plant running 24/7 in a particular community. What is the impact of that? I don't know. That is what the power plant research program, the Department of the Environment, would share with decision makers as part of a regulatory process. That's not the information that we have, but we believe that is why the CPCN process is there, and that the scale of the diesel generation being proposed here deserves a level of regulatory oversight. Thank you.
I believe that's all the questions for this week. Apologize. Mr. Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman that testified in regards to $1.5 billion of wealth being transferred out of the state. How did you calculate that again? Is that because
Actually, PJM calculated that.
That's because we're a net importer of electricity?
No, it's it is partly driven by that. It is also driven by the increase in load within the area. So you do have to import. If you want to build data centers, basically, you need to build 1 megawatt of new baseload generation within Maryland for every megawatt of data center you develop. So unless you're going to build new baseload capacity in Maryland, you can't have nice things.
So does that calculation take into consideration the electricity that was utilized by East Alco when they were on that site?
No, this is the present conditions. This is actually a PJM white paper. These numbers are already in, they're in my information that I provided to you. And this was published in December 5th, where PJM assigned all these costs. And Maryland has about 1 billion that PJM assigned to you. Quantum loophole itself, just the fact that it's located where it is, has driven 383 billion or $1 million. These are annual costs, by the way. $383 million to I'd say Frederick, Maryland, just by quantum loophole isolated. There is an impact for reducing generation, for retiring generation. So if you retire Brandon Shores, which is around 1,200 megawatts, it's the same thing as adding 1,200 megawatts of load at Brandon Shores, mathematically. So in effect, we're adding 1,500 megawatts at quantum loophole, and we're adding 1,200 megawatts at Brandon Shores, as far as the modeling is concerned. And then they calculate the impact of the flows on that addition to the system. And so there is Brandon Shores associated with this $1 billion. I have Pepco. Pepco is not adding data centers. Pepco's increase will be $400 million a year. And that is not due, that's all due to Brandon Shores.
Their increase in what?
Pardon me?
Pepco's increase in what?
Revenue requirement that you're going to have to provide to transmission owners, the ones who build and operate the system and are authorized to collect revenue.
So this site, the site in Frederick, I understand everything's already there. We have the transmission lines feeding directly into it, the substations and all that. So what would you suggest that site be utilized for, if not for a data center?
Well, I'm not in the business of doing that. You need to hire a consultant to do that. I am just doing the analysis
that
of,
you were,
I mean, I have ideas, but on what to do. If you want to hear.
I thought your testimony said that you were an expert.
I am an expert, yes. I do analysis of
But
power
not
grid.
not in this field or this site.
I'm not developing data centers. I worked for ComSat for 3 years, where I did backup power plants. I designed competitively communication facilities, transmission launch facilities. So I know very well how data centers work technically. But you know, as far as what should you do with East Alcoa, I mean, I have ideas. I would turn it into a renewable generation site to renew, to use it to generate renewable energy rather than consume baseload energy, particularly at 5 gigawatts. That is the same size as Pepco. That's Prince George's, Montgomery County, and the District of Columbia. We're going to put it all at one place at Adams.
So you would recommend solar panels on that site?
Not for data centers. I would develop whatever you come up with for renewable energy. You could put solar panels there. I would put flywheel batteries to help stabilize the grid. There's all kinds of things you could do there.
Okay. And the gentleman next to you, you said that you were concerned about these this generation being used to stabilize the grid, but the bill actually says that it must be installed with equipment that prevents the flow of electricity to the grid. So your concern is for the future or in this specific bill? Because this bill forbids what you stated.
That is true, yes. And I think what I was more remarking upon is the deja vu of that, you know, the Commonwealth of Virginia was making these exact decisions or very similar ones, jurisdictions within that a couple of years ago. And now the conversation after those facilities have been built and the energy is being consumed and the diesel backup generators have been constructed, the conversation has immediately pivoted now towards pursuing variances to allow those diesel generators to run during times of great strain.
So when Virginia did their legislation, did they also have the restriction in here that they could not connect to the grid, or are they already connected to the grid?
Well, I think what's unique here is that Virginia did not have a process like the CPCN, which is exactly an excellent model, a nationally recognized model for how these types of developments should be assessed and when it comes to all of their impacts.
That
And
wasn't my
so
question.
I
My
think-
question was whether or not the sites that you referenced in Virginia were connected to the grid when they were constructed.
I'm not particularly sure about that.
Okay,
So, yeah.
thank you.
May I clarify something?
There's no question posed, sir. Posed, sir. Thank you. I'll make sure. Seeing no further questions, say, please don't. I just want to say thank you, panel, very much. I believe this does conclude this bill hearing. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next bill hearing, which is House Bill 265, Delegate Chi. Yeah, if you have a panel, please bring them up.
Hello.
And we are joined by 2 members or 3 members from Health and Government Operations.
Hello. Here to testify on 5792.
My colleagues, and I apologize before we get started, you go ahead and have a seat. I believe there was somebody on virtual that I did not see. You wanna go ahead and pull them up? Yeah.
Hello. Can you
Go
hear
ahead,
me?
ma'am. Go apologize. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Guitarra. I'm here representing Nature Forward. Nature Forward strongly opposes and urges the committee to deny the passage of HB 579. We list our concerns in our written testimony and will highlight a few as follows. Data centers threaten Maryland's greenhouse gas reduction goals while increasing air pollution and exacerbating health illnesses. Using diesel generators is one of the most harmful ways to produce energy and has multiple negative health effects such as lung cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and respiratory illnesses like asthma. By enacting this legislation, Maryland will fall behind its climate reduction goals of becoming carbon neutral by 2035. Data centers put a large energy strain on the local energy grid. Data center can use up the same amount of energy as 50,000 homes. In Prince William County in Virginia, saw a rise of 19% of its greenhouse gas emissions between 2005 and 2018, a time period that matches the data center expansion increase in the county. Maryland has the opportunity not to repeat the same mistakes done by Virginia by not supporting this legislation. Data centers will increase water consumption and stormwater runoff. Data centers may use on average 5 million gallons of water per day to cool off its machinery. Studies show that data centers discharge tons of sediment and stormwater into local waterways, putting people and wildlife in danger. Under our current public health, economic, and social crises, it simply does not make sense to add more air and water polluting data centers without restrictions in Maryland. I respectfully urge this committee to oppose and not pass HB 579. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Seeing no questions, that does now conclude this bill hearing. All right, now we're again moving on to House Bill 265. Delegate Chi, you may begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wilson and the members of colleagues of Economic Matters Committee. I want to acknowledge the 3 colleagues from HGO who have been patiently waiting all this time for my very significant and complex bill that I'm going to present. HB 265. It simply removes a barrier to entry for insurance professionals as it relates to educational requirements before they actually take the exam to obtain a license. Currently, applicants are required to complete 20 pre-licensing course, educational course hours in order to take the exam. But over a decade ago, NAIC, which is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, which is a regulatory body for model policies across the states, determined that these pre-licensing mandates do not have significant impact on the readiness of candidates to take exams for licensure. So repeal this requirement for education does not mean that people cannot choose to take those courses still on their own. In fact, the NAIC report shows that in states that repealed that requirement, most candidates still choose to purchase study materials and take courses on their own. And also 30 other states, including Washington, D.C., have adopted NAIC's model policy that no longer requires any pre-licensing education requirements, including Virginia and Delaware as well. And also, there is an amendment, because as you will hear in, either you will see in the written testimony or the oral, there is a friendly amendment that we're gonna adopt as proposed, which is, to simply keep the pre-licensing requirements for insurance providers that do not need to take licensing exams. For those people, then they will still be required to take the educational courses. And finally, I just want to make this point that the life insurance field, for example, is one of the least diverse in the entire field of professional licensed insurance professionals. And removing the barrier certainly would diversify the field and make such professions more accessible to more people. So with that, I urge a favorable report and turn to my panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Phil Kondraski here today on behalf of the League of Life and Health Insurers of Maryland and the American Council of Life Insurers in strong support of House Bill 265. We'd like to thank Delegate Chi for introducing this important legislation to reduce barriers to entry for applicants to be insurance producers. Sitting with me at the table today is Vince Ryan, Regional Vice President of State Relations for ACLI, who is an expert and is happy to share his expertise on the broader value of repealing the pre-licensure education requirements. Before I hand it over to him, I just wanted to also thank the MIA for their consideration of this proposal. For the committee's information, we passed a draft of this bill to the MIA last fall. The bill introduced before today is a bill they're comfortable with. You'll also see a letter of information from them in your bill file. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Vince from ACLI so he can provide some further information. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, my name is Vince Ryan. I'm with the American Council of Life Insurers. And thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 265. Over the past several years, ACLI has worked with industry counterparts and regulators across the country to identify and remove unnecessary barriers that prevent otherwise qualified candidates from entering and remaining in the industry as insurance agents and brokers. As has been stated today, one barrier to that entry is the presence of unnecessary pre-licensing education mandates. In addition to the education mandate, there's also several other pre-licensing requirements that this bill would remove, including one that's rather limiting, such as during the 3 years immediately preceding the date of the application, the individual would have to be employed in the insurance industry before they could become a licensed agent. While the stated purpose of pre-licensing mandates has been to ensure candidates are prepared for the profession by helping them pass the licensing exam, the NAIC has opined through their producer licensing working group that pre-licensing mandates do not achieve the goal of ensuring candidates are prepared for the profession. Moreover, research has shown that pre-licensing mandates do not produce candidates more prepared to pass the exam. In our view and the view of the NAIC, pre-licensing mandates serve as barriers to entry into the industry by requiring excessive or unnecessary commitments of time, money, and methods of study. By removing these mandates, candidates can study in a way that fits their needs and situations. As has been stated, there are 29 states, and in addition, the District of Columbia that have removed these requirements, and we ask for a favorable report.
Being no questions, we thank you for your testimony. I believe that concludes this bill. We kidding? Delegate Queen.
One quick question. Thank you for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was one comment about it was amendment to say certain types of licensing that they didn't think should be their title insurance and limited producer licensing. Is that something you're considering, or are you saying all? Yes, you're considering this?
Yeah, we're accepting this as
Okay.
a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
I believe that now concludes the hearing. Delegate Adams.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. For the record, Delegate Chris Adams, bringing House Bill 1387 by request from good senator from Southern Maryland, Jack Bailey. So the bill prohibits a private passenger motor vehicle insurer from increasing a premium based on the claims history of an insured where two or fewer of the claims within the immediately preceding 3-year period were for accidents or losses caused by a collision with a free roaming wild animal and for which the insured was not at fault for the loss. My understanding is in the Senate, this bill is being turned into a study, and I would just ask the committee to let's see what happens in the Senate and proceed accordingly. Thank you very much.
I have a brief question. I just want to clarify. This bill is by request, correct?
That's right.
By request. Thank you.
All right.
We can, but it's by request. So we do have some unfavorables. I'm sure they will be brief for this by request bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jason Weintraub here on behalf of the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. You have a copy of our written testimony. We appreciate the sponsor working with us. We are unfavorable in the bill as drafted, but thank his willingness to work with us. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Luke Pinton here on NAMIC, the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies. To be brief, I'll sort of ditto everything that Jason said and just say we're happy to see how the bill turns out in the Senate and work with the study group to be supportive and provide data. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Nancy Egan here?
She is not. I'm here just for APCIA. We didn't know.
That's fine.
Where we'd be.
All right. Well, that concludes this bill hearing, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next bill we have is House Bill 258, Delegate Chi.
Can I have Basil, Josh White, Rick Peters? Yes. Doesn't matter, no. Yeah, this. Maybe you could be last. Yeah. On this panel, or you want to be first? I'll try to you afterwards. Oh. I'm sure. Okay. Good afternoon again, Chair Wilson and the colleagues of ECM. For the record, I'm Delegate Lily Chi here to present HB 258. HB 258 is to establish a customer-sided solar program within MEA, the Maryland Energy Administration. Customer-sided solar is simply a solar energy generating system on the property of the customer instead of being connected to a central power plant. It's basically rooftop solar that we're talking about. As we transition increasingly to an electricity-powered economy and the lifestyle, such decentralized small-scale power generation will play an oversized role in our clean energy future. This past decade has seen significant growth in rooftop solar adoption. Yet despite the gains, rooftop solar is still a largely untapped resource, accounting for roughly only 1.5% of energy we consume in this country. Maryland's renewable portfolio standards requires 50% of electricity generation from renewable energy sources by 2030, including a solar carve-out of 14.5%. Yet currently, solar only accounts for 6% of Maryland's electricity generation. In 2022, there were about 5,000 rooftop solar installations in our state, far short of the 11,000 we would need each year to meet our renewable energy goals. So HB 258 addresses this shortfall by establishing a customer-sided solar program within MEA to provide grants to income eligible customers in low to moderate income communities, overburdened communities, and underserved communities. And each of those definitions is listed in the bill, as well as the fiscal note. The impetus of this program is to lower barriers for adoption and make rooftop solar more accessible to more Marylanders. This bill is based on the recommendation of the task force to study solar incentives created by the Maryland legislature last year. It was headed by Chair Pinsky, and one of our members was on the task force, Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo. This is a 3-year program with 2 tiers based on income and community location, providing different grant amounts for income verified customers in those communities, which is low and moderate income, overburdened, and underserved. The first tier is income verified low to moderate income customers who are at 80%, who are at below 80% of area median household income. And they would receive up to $7,500 per solar system. And the second tier will be those households above 80% area median income for that census tract. We are still working with MEA to decide how what is the upper cap for the income will be, and that group will receive up to $5,000 per solar system. So the funding for the program will come from the Solar Alternative Compliance Program, ACP revenues, which are payments by electricity suppliers to meet their required renewable energy credit obligations under RPS. So with this program, we expect about 2,000 homes per year to be able to install rooftop solar systems, which will significantly increase the number of solar jobs and reap the numerous benefits related to the economic and environmental impact. And finally, I want to talk about the administrative costs because we've been working hard with MEA on this issue. This bill has been amended pretty heavily, as you might see. It will have a separate account within the ACP fund to cover administrative costs, which will be equivalent to about 10% of the entire fund size. And we are still working with MEA to add some language about consumer protection. And I want to take a moment to thank my colleague from MEA, the MEA team, for their very valuable input in helping us define the scope, best define the scope of this bill. In summary, HB 258 is an important step toward advancing equitable access to renewable energy sources and our state's transition to clean energy. With that, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Evie from MEA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. For the record, I am Evie Schwartz, speaking on behalf of the Maryland Energy Administration. Over the past half year, MEA Director Pinsky served as the chair of the task force to study solar incentives. The objective of the task force was to make recommendations to accelerate solar development and to do so in a just and equitable manner. This bill, with the amendments, will do just that. It will create a true incentive program to grow the residential solar market with rebates up to $7,500 reserved upfront. It will also make solar accessible for Maryland households that currently cannot afford to purchase, maintain, and insure a solar system on their own home. Members of the committee, I'd also like to address the hefty fiscal note and the written testimony from MEA. To echo Delegate Shi, we collaborated very closely on these amendments. The amendments right-size the program, dramatically increasing incentives for residential solar, while also preserving other very important solar programs, such as solar on schools, parking lots, and resiliency hubs. The amendments also permit a portion of the solar alternative compliance payments to be utilized for administration. This will ensure that MEA can effectively administer the program utilizing these special funds with no need for any general funds. Discussion is still ongoing around the appropriate income cap for the program. MEA asked the committee to add an income cap of 150% of median income to the second tier of eligible households, or preferably to eliminate the entire second tier altogether. This is consistent with the recommendations of the Solar Task Force, and we believe consistent with the intent of this legislative body for the use of special ACP funds. Overall, I ask the committee for a favorable report with the amendments. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Josh White from KO Public Affairs on behalf of the Maryland Rooftop Solar Coalition. Our coalition is comprised of Maryland businesses that promote Maryland's clean energy policies through the installation and operation of rooftop and customer-sited solar systems. And we are very grateful to Delegate Chi for this very important bill. As the delegate stated, if Maryland is to achieve its renewable energy goals, you must really dramatically increase our residential solar. Residential solar accounts for almost 50% of deployed solar around the state. Yet over the last 5 years, residential solar market has experienced a decline and stagnation. Last July, the MEA reported that we need at least 130,000 additional homes by the year 2035 to meet our current renewable energy goals, which is equivalent to about 11,000 households each year. 11,000 sounds like a large number, but it is achievable because in 2022, with only slightly larger populations, Virginia and New Jersey deployed 11,000 and 17,000 installations, while Maryland only did 5,800. This bill will seek to keep pace with the national installment rates and meet our energy goals, but also it will be a tiered income-based grant program to boost solar access in lower and middle-income households and moderate-income households and living in overburdened and underserved communities. We believe that this is a great step on the way to meeting our goals, and we believe that rooftop solar will be one of the great ways of making that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and esteemed committee members for the opportunity to present in favor of HB 258. My name is Jake Assail, and I serve as the Secretary of the Maryland Rooftop Solar Coalition and as the Senior Manager of Policy at Goodleap, a leading financial technology company focused on sustainable home solutions. Last year, the Maryland Energy Administration estimated that the state needs 130,000 new residential solar installations by 2035 to meet the state's ambitious and necessary clean energy goals. Unfortunately, Maryland is woefully short of MEA's benchmark and lacks the policies to jumpstart adoption. According to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab data, since 2016, the Maryland residential solar industry has declined by nearly 80%. To get Maryland on track with MEA goals, the state would need to grow its residential solar market by nearly 60% annually. HB 258 would help bridge that gap by offering grants that meaningfully reduce the cost of solar for low and moderate income Marylanders, but also those living in overburdened and underserved communities through the program's second tier. For context, overburdened census tracts can contend with a variety of environmental health indicators, such as high asthma emergency room discharges, low birth weight infants, proximity to emitting power plants, and higher exposure to particulate matter 2.5. In addition to helping meet the state's clean energy goals and serving LMIOU Marylanders, HB 258 would also support job creation in those very same communities. Residential solar projects create roughly 47 jobs per megawatt installed, more than any other type of solar project. Allowing the residential solar market to decline further could continue Maryland's displacement as a leading solar state. Maryland has an opportunity to meet its clean energy ambitions, serve Marylanders who stand to benefit from clean energy the most, and boost in-state jobs. There's more we need to do, but HB 258 will help put the state back on the right track. Thank you for your time and support.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Thad Cully, Director of Policy for Sunrun. Sunrun is the largest provider of residential and solar storage in the country. Also the pioneer of the solar as a service subscription model. And I just want to address one aspect of this bill, so hopefully I can be brief on this. And that is allowing the assignability of these solar grants to the installer or the third-party owner of the system. And the way this works for a third-party owned system, we like to keep it as simple as possible for the customer. We apply for the permits, apply for their connection, and also where there are available incentives, apply for those as well and incorporate that into the price to actually lower what the contract price for the lease or the PPA would be. So we applaud this bill in kind of moving to that practice to give consumers additional options that they don't have under the current clean energy grant, which is not allowed to be assignable. So just with that brief remark, we at Sunrun support and urge for a favorable report. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, would you like to have another witness join this favorable panel?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Rick Peters. I'm the president of Solar Energy Services. I'm also a board member with the Maryland Rooftop Solar Coalition and CHESA, the Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association. I've been installing solar for about 16 years, run a company called Solar Energy Services based in Millersville in Anne Arundel County, District 33. About 45 employees. We install residential and small commercial, mostly rooftop, some small ground mount systems. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've migrated a lot more of our business towards commercial. The residential business has been really tough for us the last several years, and we've just decided that we have to focus in one segment of the business. So we're not currently marketing to the low and moderate income community, but we do recruit heavily from that community. A lot of our employees come from that community, and I know we want to see more equity in solar adoption, and it's been established in the industry that when employment comes from the community, the solar adoption increases also. So I think the job component of this is really important. You heard Jake mention 27 jobs per megawatt hour for rooftop solar. I'll tell you, in our organization, our average rate in the field is close to $27 an hour. 18 to 42 is the range of people that of hourly rates of folks that we have working in the field. It's a tough business because of the up and down nature of it that we've seen over the years, but the people are passionate about it. I think this bill will not only increase access to solar, but it will increase competition and scale, and it will provide for a much more inclusive solar industry. So without anything further, I ask for your favorable report. Thank you.
Steve? Gentleman on the end, you mentioned that the installations have gone down and we haven't been installing solar over the last few years. Is that what you said? Okay, why is that?
Mr. Chairman, if I don't mind that.
You can't answer that, you mentioned.
Well, I mean, he's the technical person, so I thought he would give a better answer than
So
I
you're-
would.
Okay, so we'll let the technical guy.
Well, I think it depends. It's different for all of us. And for my business, it's been primarily the economics. The payback is not fast enough for the average homeowner. So our company tends to serve higher income folks who are going to make that.
Okay, I'll get to that question in a second, but I asked you this question in all seriousness. Solar has always been presented that once I get it on my roof, I'm not paying anything. I'm virtually selling it back if I possibly can. It's taking my energy bills down. If it's true, why wouldn't this just be everywhere right now? Why are you coming here for an ask? We've been doing this, as you stated, for over 16 years, and we're at 6%. And to your point, how do we ever expect to get to 50% if we don't start hitting the people and helping the people who use the most electricity? Because by doing this, if we were at our 50% goal today, we would be able to get rid of quote unquote our wrecks. We'd be able to have energy would be more efficient and what have you. So help me out with why this isn't working exponentially. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, if it's as good as you say it is, if we're doing everything we need to do, why do we need this program? Why isn't it working is what I'm asking essentially. And why not give it, if it's really what we want to do, and if it's really what we're going to do, why not offer this program to the people who use the most electricity? Anybody?
Or do you want me to?
Anybody
Okay.
at this point.
So solar renewable energy credits are another incentive that are really important in this market. And we talked a lot during the solar task force about how the value of those credits has dropped significantly. And if you look at the graph of residential solar as well as other segments of the solar market, it's dropped down since 2016 as solar renewable energy credits values have dropped. And so there are additional conversations about how do we make that market work and support this industry. This bill is a bridge. That's what we've been calling it, a 3-year program to help the industry now while we work on the solution for the solar renewable energy credits. And at this point in time, without that incentive, the payback periods are much longer than they were a few years ago.
Okay, I'm a businessman. To me, that tells me it's failing. I'm a businessman. I mean, when you're sitting down telling me I now need a bridge for something we've done in the past, we pushed this and we've been pushing it so hard, we penalized our ratepayers to get to this point. And now when we're approaching that, we're sitting down, we're saying it's unworkable. We need more money. We need more incentives. We need more of this to get to somewhere where this was supposed to be the answer. And I have trouble putting my dollars and cents towards something that you admittedly tell me it's not working. Isn't that so? I'll be done with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I make one comment?
Don't worry. So there's no question, please. No, appreciate, there's no question. No, man, there's no question. It's okay. Well, we're gonna open the door back up. Elliot Adams.
So to Sunrun, there were two questions. I guess the first one is at the end, you were talking about assignability and I was listening. Could you please kind of rephrase what you were saying at the end of your testimony there so I can understand what your point was?
Sure. I believe I was addressing how the upfront incentives or tax credits that are available are monetized and put into the contract rate. Was that the element?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, in any state or any jurisdiction where there are available incentives, we're going to look at the totality of that and try to incorporate that into the contract price. There's a very competitive market we're in to get the lowest price possible for the consumer. And I think in a program like this, it's really targeted geographically and by income level. We can actually expand solar to where it hasn't really been before in Maryland in a meaningful way. And I think that's really why we are here at this table supporting this bill and supporting that provision, particularly that third-party ownership is a way that has expanded access to lower and middle income households across the country. But also another key element of that third-party ownership model is the operation and maintenance that goes along with it. So 10 years in, if you have to replace an inverter, that's priced into the lease and the PPA. That is something that we would take care of, which is another thing. There's no upfront cost to the consumer in most of these cases. So yeah.
So let me just tread carefully on the next question because I think it goes to some of the concerns I have when you're approaching the market. How do you actually approach the market? Is it door-to-door sales? Is it direct mail? So how are you reaching customers?
I would say it's a combination of all of those.
Okay, so door-to-door sales?
That is included within our sales approach.
Okay, does Maryland regulate door-to-door sales within your industry? Do you know the answer to that question? Like I'm a contractor. I have an MHIC license. There are rules related to door-to-door sales, cooling off period, these sort of things. I'm just asking whether or not that exists within construct of your industry.
Delegate, I believe that is considered a form of speech that cannot be banned, as I understand.
Okay. So all right, so there's not door-to-door sale. Let me just make an observation and get your feedback on it. Are you concerned if we're pushing hard? Okay, and maybe we've always been pushing hard, but maybe harder, that we might be concerned about how the consumer interaction is when you're selling this to a residential customer at their door.
Right, and Delegate, I'll attempt to answer that here.
Okay.
This is a moment in time where I think the industry is doing a lot of introspection and doing a lot of earnest work.
I agree with that.
The solar energy industry.
That's why I said I'm treading carefully with the question. I'm just trying to explore a observation or concern.
I will represent to you that the Solar Energy Industries Association, the National Association, is working to have a standard for solar sales, which we would expect to be later this or middle of the year rolled out. So that is something I think is an advancement, and there's a lot more work to do. Clearly,
all right. That's it. Thank you.
May I also add from the administrator's point of view?
That's okay. Unless he has another question, we're trying.
Just really.
Again, I gotta keep it narrowly tailored, guys, right? Which is my electives. If there's any other information you'd like to pass on, I'm sure you can do that offline. Okay? Seeing no more questions, I think that concludes this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have Josh Feldmark, Robin Dutta,
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, I am Robin Dutta. I'm the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association. We're a regional trade association based across Maryland, DC, and Virginia with over 100 members. A number of those members active and located here in the state of Maryland. We're here to provide favorable testimony on HB 258, the residential grant program, in order to not tread over the same ground that all the other witnesses did. What I just want to touch on is kind of the bigger picture, why it's important that there are more residential solar systems deployed, why they should be in low and moderate income communities for those households and underserved communities and overburdened communities. At CHESA, we believe, in an all of the above approach. Clean energy is, wherever it can be responsibly built. That includes on homes, on businesses, on over parking lots, as well as large scale and wholesale, solar and clean energy facilities. And it's important that we have that geographic mix and we have that system type mix, because our electric grid is changing. The way we're using power is changing. With electrification, especially in electric vehicles, we're going to be using the grid in a very different way. Moving forward, this grid of the future that we all, I think about and talk about and are waiting to, kind of build, is going to be using, basically taking the role of today's grid, the natural gas system, as well as gas stations. And so that means that the grid has to look differently, it needs to act differently, and we're all using it differently. And I think that's where we want to make sure that no communities are left behind to take part. One part of that is to make sure that we have residential solar across the state and in all communities. And that can be part of the equation to then add storage, to add next generation policies around things like grid services and virtual power plants in order to create a lower cost transition for clean energy and then a more equitable transition across the board for the state. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Joshua Feldmark. I'm here representing a company called CI Renewables. We are a commercial and industrial solar developer. I'm here to tell the committee that my company will have absolutely no benefit from this proposal. We're commercial industrial. We do not do residential rooftop. So the obvious next question is, what am I doing here? And there's two good answers to that. One, I guess you get to decide if they're good answers or not. One is that we have heard repeatedly from you and your various colleagues that the solar industry tends to be represented in a way that seems entirely self-serving for the individual company. And we never, not that we never, but that we are largely, when we come in front of you, only protecting our own self-interest. This is good for solar and this is good for the community. And so I'm here despite the fact that it will not help my company specifically. The second is, this is good policy. And that is because the way the system is currently set up, if that the money that goes into the ACP fund, the Alternative Compliance Fund, is meant to sort of go back into the marketplace in order to help generate solar. There is already millions of dollars in that fund. This is the way to get it back out. And I will say we have set policy-wise a priority to use that money to get it to the projects that are harder to finance, that are harder to make work in this economy. Sure, we could just probably open the floodgates and say, build the cheapest, best, as much solar as you can in the cheapest way possible. And we would do that without reaching any one of our other stated state goals in terms of spreading the wealth and the opportunity. And so for that reason, I stand here asking for a favorable report.
I see no questions. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
I believe that does conclude our hearing. We're moving on now to 397. Delegate Charkoudian. Please.
We just do David. Yeah.
That's the right.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. For the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 397. Before I get started, I want you to take a good look at this panel and see who I have up here. Who I have up here is BG&E on my sponsor panel, BG&E's union, a grassroots, faith-based environmental justice organization, and the Office of People's Counsel. So take a photo, because this may never happen again. And I want to tell you what this bill is and why everyone is here with me today. So we have generally accepted, if you look at all of the, thank you, Chris. If you look at all of the, I'm sorry, Delegate Valderrama, if you look at all of the state's climate goals and the direction that we're headed, building electrification and residential electrification is a really big part of that. There may be other pieces to that solution, but that is a really core piece of our solution. So as we look at building electrification, there's three issues that we have got to address if we're going to do it right. One of the issues is equity. Right now, as has been discussed in a lot of the bills we've had here, higher income people have access to tax credits, have access to upfront capital, have access to ways to electrify their homes, sort of get the best of the technology. And we have to build policies that make sure that low-income people and low-income communities receive the most and the best of the investments that we're making. The second issue that we have to address is jobs. There are a lot of people who have worked to keep us safe and warm on the gas industry for years. And when we do this transition, we cannot do this transition and leave them behind. They have got to have good jobs, equivalent careers. And so we've got to have plans that build them into the transition. And the third is the grid. As we know, doing significant electrification is going to put a strain on our grid. There's different opinions out there about what exactly that strain is going to look like and when that strain is going to come to bear on us and when exactly we're going to see that impact. But there is not a question that we have got to electrify in the most efficient ways possible because our grid is going to have impacts. And if we don't electrify in a way that avoids a lot of additional costs on our grid, that is going to cost our ratepayers. And whenever we have costs to our ratepayers, that affects everybody. It affects business, it affects residents, and it especially affects low-income communities. And so what this bill has is it addresses all three of those things. This bill uses network geothermal, also known as community geothermal, neighborhood geothermal, and it is a pilot project that allows us to test in Maryland in a handful of neighborhoods what this could look like. And it allows us to test it now, giving us time before we have to make major decisions about how we're going to electrify and decarbonize the vast majority of the buildings in this state. And so here's how it works. We know that geothermal is the most efficient way to heat and cool buildings. There is a recent, if anyone's interested in it, this is just the executive summary, but I can get you the full report. There's a recent report by the Department of Energy that finds that investing in geothermal can save literally across this country, $1 trillion, billions of dollars on avoided costs to the transmission grid, to generation, to the distribution grid, to all of these things, because it is so efficient that it keeps us from having to build additional transmission, additional distribution, and additional generation and peaker plants. Network geothermal in particular adds to that efficiency. It is actually even more efficient than individual geothermal, because what it does is it shares heating load and heat waste from one building to the next. So for example, if you have a neighborhood and you have them on a shared geothermal system, picture the gas grid, except instead of gas lines going down the street, it's geothermal lines going down the street, connecting to geothermal boreholes in a couple of parking lots on the ends of that neighborhood. And now, in addition to the geothermal, super efficient heating and cooling happening in all those buildings, when one building, let's say a fire station, is shedding waste heat, that heat is going into the system and is heating the homes that are nearby, right? So in addition to the geothermal efficiency, you get the added efficiency of the shared load of the different buildings. So that adds to the efficiency. This technology has been used and proven in college campuses across the country. Colorado Mesa University has been around the longest, since 2006. It is more recent that it's being tested in neighborhoods right now in Massachusetts, where the first system is getting ready to be operational. There's additional projects coming online in Massachusetts, some in New York, Illinois is starting to test this. And the basic idea is that what we do is where right now we have gas companies who own gas lines, those same gas companies instead will own, in that same right of way, geothermal lines. They'll drill the boreholes, they'll own the lines, and they will bring clean geothermal energy to homes to heat and cool those homes. It will be rate-based the same way that gas lines are rate-based. So we take advantage of a structure that's already in place, but we move away from fossil fuels of gas and we move towards the clean energy that the earth gives us. The earth, literally the earth warms us 6 feet down, constant temperature. So that's the basics of the model. This particular bill is a pilot. We use some funds to support organizing that happens in neighborhoods to get people to sign up. This is an opt-in bill, so neighborhoods would sign up. Nobody is going to be forced to transition off gas if they don't want to. Folks can opt in, they can opt out. But the neighborhood organizing will happen. A group of somewhere between 100 maybe and 200 residents, might be multifamily buildings, might be single-family homes, will opt in and will present themselves to the utility. The utility will run the engineering studies and will then present 1 or 2 proposals to the Public Service Commission with a cost benefit analysis. The Public Service Commission will then consider the neighborhood input, the cost benefit analysis from the utility, and will determine and will approve any of the projects that pass the cost benefit analysis. That's the way that the pilot is built. Once we have these pilots and we have them operational for 2 years, our programs will be part of participating in a national set of data collection and analysis. The national set of data collection and analysis will give us the information both from Maryland and from the other states that are doing this. And that will put us in a position in a few years to make some determinations as a state about how much avoided cost does this actually give us to the grid, how effectively does it work, and do we want to make this a permanent part of our energy future? The one other thing that I want to highlight, and I do want to urge that we pass this bill now, partly because I always want to pass all of my bills right now because they're all so good, but specifically the timing on this one is important. And here's what it is. The IRA gives us a couple of different things that make this investment a really good deal. First of all, there's the investment tax credit. And so the utilities would be able to do this entire project for 30 to 40% less than they would do it without the investment tax credit. So that's really going to make it an efficient financial investment. Second, there's IRA rebates. The IRA rebates are for the full electrification behind the meter. And so MEA is going to manage those IRA rebates, would hold aside a certain amount of IRA rebates for these projects to allow for full electrification in low-income housing at no cost to the individuals in the homes. And the third, and so for those 2 reasons, it's really important that we do this as soon as possible because we don't want to lose the IRA, the ability to use the IRA funds now. Because we want to be able to test this with IRA funds. We may find that it's a good enough deal. I think we will, that we're going to want to do it just overall as part of our future state policy. But we sort of have a very low risk opportunity to test it at this point in time because of the IRA money. The last thing that I want to highlight is that this bill does require that this be done in communities that are 80% low moderate income. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. As I said at the beginning, this is a model that allows sort of the best of technologies, geothermal, to become available to lowest income folks who might not otherwise have access to it. And so prioritizing this in low income communities is important both for equity. It's also important because a lot of the IRA money is targeted for low income communities. So to be able to use that, we need to make sure we're doing it in primarily low income communities. With that, I'll turn it over to members of my panel and request a favorable report. Would you like to go next?
I'd love to. Good afternoon, Chair Crosby, members of the committee. My name is Charles Washington, here on behalf of BGE in full support of the policy direction of this legislation, and with the commitment to work with the sponsor and the committee on the amendments necessary to move this bill forward. BGE supports an integrated energy delivery system where multiple sources of energy are combined to maximize customer choice while assisting the state in reaching its decarbonization goals at the lowest possible price. Beginning in 2022, BGE began studying pathways to achieve Maryland's decarbonization goals, and we became increasingly optimistic about the possibilities of network geothermal as a component of Maryland's energy mix. Since then, we've visited with utilities working on geothermal pilots in Massachusetts and New York. We've stayed in constant contact with them, even as we hired our own consultant to evaluate what a network geothermal program would look like in Maryland. Where would we site it? What will it cost? And will people want it? Through this work and through our engagement, we learned that network geothermal is cost competitive with other decarbonization options, including full building electrification. In addition, network geothermal mitigates concerns that we have about the capacity on the grid on the hottest days and the coldest days, because it does not contribute to peak in the way that other solutions do. And with the 30% tax credit that Delegate Charkoudian mentioned, we really think that network geothermal moves beyond just cost competitiveness into true cost effectiveness, where we would expect that a geothermal pilot for a grouping of properties, homes, and businesses to cost less than other building decarbonization options. So BGE is supportive of this legislation. We've been doing our homework, but what we're missing is hands-on experience with the technology right here at home, with Maryland's geology, and with Central Maryland's building stock, and a unique perspective of our customers. For that reason, BGE is supportive of this legislation, and if you are going to pass a Charkoudian bill this year, let it be this one thing.
I'm Joelle Novi from Silver Spring. It's one of my mottos that you know you're on the right track when you find a solution that solves more than one problem at the same time. And network geothermal is beautiful because it solves more than one of Maryland's problems. We could electrify at scale, cut climate pollution, and bring family supporting jobs to workers. And the final piece of the Warmth Act puzzle are residents whose homes would be networked together. Would they sign up? Yes. In the low and moderate income communities where my organization and Action in Montgomery are working, there is a groundswell of families eager to get their homes off gas. They understand the harms of gas burning because they're measuring the pollution themselves. This is a detector that we use to measure nitrogen oxide, a respiratory irritant generated by gas burning stoves. The EPA's outdoor guideline for safe levels of NO2 is 100 parts per billion. Adama Haruna and colleagues have measured NO2 in over 300 kitchens at Cider Mill Apartments in Gaithersburg, Enclave High Rises in White Oak, and in Northwest Park's Garden Style Apartments. After her gas burning stove was on for 20 minutes, Ana Argueta measured NO2 at 434 parts per billion, 4 times the EPA limit. Adama says that many of the kitchens she tests reach unhealthy NO2 levels when the families cook, contributing to asthma and other breathing problems, especially for young and old. In December, nearly 400 folks gathered at Good Hope United Methodist Church Sanctuary with delegates Chi, Queen, and Charkoudian and Senator Feldman, and we held up NO2 readings from our kitchen tests. A whole section of the room held up red signs with readings over 100. These communities want to provide healthy homes for their loved ones, and they see the gas burning appliances they're stuck with as an obstacle to that goal. If the Warmth Act pilot offers these families a chance to shift to healthier, more efficient all-electric equipment, they would sign up. Let's get this done.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. I would like to first introduce myself and Local Union 410 as the representing body for Baltimore Gas and Electric's non-managerial employees. We currently represent over 1,400 employees at BGE. Of those 1,400 employees, as of November 27, 2023, 639 skilled labor workers were designated under BGE's natural gas seniority list. These workers, also called bargaining unit employees, are among those who contribute daily, directly, and significantly to BGE's efforts to provide safe and reliable service to its customers. Those workers are also fellow members of our community. Unlike contracted labor, who is typically part of a transitory workforce who travel from job to job. These workers are those who live in Maryland, own or aspire to own homes here. They raise their families in our community. House Bill 397 will ensure a transition for these employees to thermal energy systems and accompany residential electrification that protects workers' rights by promoting stable labor relations. Protecting the local workforce who contribute daily, directly, and significantly to safe and reliable gas service to customers is paramount to Maryland's infrastructure. IBEW Local 410 supports House Bill 397 as its adherence to federal policy supporting and encouraging collective bargaining. Specifically, federal policy is expressly articulated in Section 1 of the National Labor Relations Act. The plain language of the statute provides that the federal policy to encourage the practice and procedure of collective bargaining, and it enumerates the multiple benefits of this recognized practice for the free flow of commerce. IBEW Local 410 and BGE's working relationship itself is a testament to the benefits of collective bargaining. The relationship between Local 410 and BGE is mature and stable. IBEW Local 410 estimates the importance of the strong and stable relationship between public service corporations and their employees and contracted labor cannot be overstated. IBEW Local 410 is happy to see House Bill 397 further supports this sorts of relationships. For these reasons, IBEW Local 410 requests a favorable report on House Bill 397. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee, David Lapp, Maryland Office of People's Counsel. We're happy to be here in support of HB 397. We support limited pilot programs that explore technologies that have the potential to benefit customers as the state moves to meet its climate goals. We believe this program for a network geothermal pilot program meets that criteria. Aside from its potential for benefiting customers, as you see from this panel, the technology provides a possible path forward for the state's gas utilities and workers as customers take advantage of electrification technologies and move off the gas system. We are aware of other states implementing pilot programs, and the literature shows that the technology has promise, as it is highly efficient, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and may alleviate pressure on the electric system from electrification. The reporting and data collection that the bill requires will ensure those of us who are engaged before the Public Service Commission have the information necessary to evaluate the technology. HB 397 has important consumer protection measures that are critical to our support. Among other protections, the pilot program would take advantage of federal funding. It's limited in scope, provides that participating customers have support for the work in their homes, prioritizes low and moderate income housing, allows customers to opt out, helps avoid costly gas replacement work, and requires that the program be in the public interest and in the interest of ratepayers in order to be approved by the Public Service Commission. We appreciate the sponsor working with us to make sure the pilot is appropriately scaled and includes safeguards for residential utility customers. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Charles, I know it's a charcuterie bill. You actually didn't even sign up correctly, I don't think. So I know you're already confused on being favorable, but I had to give you grief on that one.
Mr. Chairman, I think I said that I was fully supportive of the policy direction and would work with the committee on amendments.
Yeah, but I get, we don't have a complete list, actually. I don't think we have everybody, but you're definitely not on the favorable. So that's probably why you're not there. You're probably unfavorable just because out of habit.
It's
get Boffo.
muscle memory, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Apologies.
That'll get Boffo.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And clearly miracles do happen here in the General Assembly. Really quick, you may have mentioned this, delegate, but you have a lengthy fiscal note here. I'm really focused on page number 10, where it says MEA expects total expenditures for the state to be approximately $24 million to comply with the bill. Can you kind of talk about the fiscal impact?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, thanks for saying that, because I forgot to mention, I didn't receive my amendments until yesterday, I think I emailed them to everybody because they address a bunch of pieces. One of the things they address, actually, I'm not sure if the folks are here, but I know there was some concern that the fiscal note also says that the small municipal utilities would be affected. One of my amendments is to exempt all the utilities under 75,000. They could apply if they want, but they're not required to put in a pilot. So that is also addressed, which is in the fiscal note. But to get back to your question, we've actually restructured the sort of flow of the money and who's responsible for what. And we've got some analyses that it actually ends up being less. So originally the way that we imagined it in the bill is that MEAs, and that wasn't MEA general funds, by the way. It's federal funds plus Empower money plus CEF money plus it's not coming out of the general fund. But even with that, when we sort of added all of the behind the meter costs, and MEA was going to be responsible in that stack, including the ground source heat pump, it ends up costing everybody less if the utility owns a ground source heat pump because of, and this gets kind of weird and technical, but the Treasury's current rule on geothermal is if you have split ownership between the boreholes and the heat pumps, then you can't get the tax credit. And so when we kind of added the math in a bunch of different configurations, it ends up costing everybody less if the utility owns both so that we can get the 30% tax credit. It kind of brings down the cost in terms of rates. And so once that gets shifted out, then we rearrange. The utility is now doing the stuff behind the meter. The MEA is doing the rebates. And so the way that the new language is structured, they're on the hook essentially for $9 million of IRA money and any other money that's available, but they don't have to meet all of the costs of the behind the meter. That's what the current amendments say. And what I want to say about the $9 million of IRA money is that money is going to go to home electrification somewhere. We have 168 million that has to go to electrification. So it could either go to these homes or those homes. So it shouldn't matter. It's not like it's taking it away from something else. It's going to go to home electrification. And we're just saying like, hold 9 million aside for this. And so it sort of changes the math. And I can run the math with sort of the utilities and with MEA. Again, a lot of this kind of came together, the amendments in the last couple days. So you should have the amendments, but that's the basic change. Thank you for the chance to reflect on that.
Good. Question on, let's say the pilot doesn't work, then who ends up footing the bill?
So there's two different kinds of doesn't work, I guess. One kind of doesn't work is that we run the numbers and we say, like, this is assuming that sort of all the DOE analyses and everything is correct, where we're going to see a major impact on cost avoidance. And so we're going to want to scale it up and do it across the state. So one version of doesn't work would be that we run those numbers and we're like, okay, we don't have that avoided cost. So this is fine. We leave these neighborhoods as they are. And then we don't replicate it in any other neighborhood. That would be one kind of doesn't work. The second kind of doesn't work, in theory, could be a technical doesn't work. Like it physically, technically doesn't work. Like people aren't getting heat in their homes. I just need to say that's very unlikely because this technology has been used and done in multiple places, just not in this kind of a scale. Not in this kind of scale, not in this kind of a neighborhood. By the time we turn on the systems in Maryland, the systems in Massachusetts will have been operational for 1.5 years, 2 years, a couple of winters. So it's very unlikely that the technology won't work. But in theory, if we had to swap everybody back, part of what the bill does is it directs the Public Service Commission to work with the utilities on what the rate basing of that would look like. And it would end up being rate based, but that's what the PSC is authorized to work on, sort of regs in a system to put things back how they were, I guess.
And so do we have another example of a pilot that we've said, if the people in the pool, it doesn't work for them, then everybody else has to cover that cost? Because like in CCE, it's the other way, right? If CCE doesn't work, only the people in the CCE have to cover it. On this, it's the other way.
Well, but hang on, let's think about what the cost would actually be. So you have sort of again, this is worst case scenario, and I want to stress how much this is a tested and proven technology as a network, as geothermal, which has been around for decades, as a network, which has been around for decades. So the likelihood that the possibility that it's not that there's a problem with the avoided costs theory is out there. The possibility that people are going to be cold in their homes is almost zero. But let's just say that happened. The cost to fix it would be, we would be taking the ground source heat pump out and we would be putting in an air source heat pump. We wouldn't be like tearing up the streets again, pulling out we wouldn't be like reversing everything. We'd be putting an air source heat pump in where there was a ground source heat pump in, 200 to 500 homes, right? So we could figure out what that cost is, but in the context of this entire project, it's actually, going to be less than half a cent per customer because quote unquote fix it. But we could run those numbers for you if you want them.
No, I mean,
does that make sense? What I'm saying make sense?
yeah, I get it. I mean, I also think though that like the other component to this too, right, is that when we lay this new infrastructure, which I'm not doubting it, but the existing infrastructure comes out.
No. So no, it doesn't. So let me just talk about what this would look like. So you have, right now you have a gas pipe going down the street. Now you're going to lay, because it's way more expensive to pull a gas pipe out of the ground. So you're going to use the same right of way, but you're not pulling out the gas pipe. You're next to the gas pipe. You're putting a geothermal pipe, right?
Yep.
You could have people opting out within that community. They're going to keep getting gas, right? So you still have, and your neighborhood, while we're prioritizing ones at the end of the gas lines, that's not a requirement. So probably most likely your neighborhood has gas running through it still, because you've got a neighborhood over here that's using gas and a neighborhood over there that's using gas. So the gas is still running down that pipe. But so you're not pulling gas pipes out, but if the geothermal doesn't work, we don't need to rehook people. We could rehook people onto gas, but we don't need to rehook them onto gas. We still have those electrified homes. And so you would actually just need to take out a ground source heat pump and put in an air source heat pump. Do you understand? Is that?
Yep, I got you. Okay.
And you haven't taken, none of this takes gas. The pilot does not take gas lines out of the ground.
Okay, I'll get with, I mean, maybe I just read it differently. I'm trying to find it. But
if that's not clear, like we can run some numbers, but if that's not clear, we can also fix it. It's obviously a big bill. And so there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of amendments already in there, but we can identify additional ones as necessary.
Okay. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Delegate Charkoudian, thank you for bringing this bill. And because I'm a novice, I'm still trying to figure out who Reggie is. So if we can have that conversation about who Reggie is, then I would appreciate that.
Do you want me to do that now?
No, thank you. But I'm looking at the unfavorable, and I see. Could you explain the CBA in the bill, and also they're talking about how it could have a substantial financial burden on contractors. Would it or would it not have that burden on contractors?
Yeah, so I think Tommy's here representing, I think that's ABC, and I think he's going to clarify their position because I actually have been working with them for a little while now. What I would say is that the requirements that we have in the bill, we talked a little bit about the labor piece. So the requirement in the bill is that essentially we want to give, so there's 600 people right now working on BG&E. Obviously Washington Gas is separate, but 600 people in BG&E who work on gas. These are people who have kept us safe and warm for decades. We want to make sure they have good jobs, similar jobs, that they have that transition. So the first sort of step is that any of the work that can be done negotiated in the contract with the in-house workers gets done by the in-house workers. Then there's additional work that either they don't have the expertise on or may get done by external contractors. Those external contractors, it would be done under a community benefit agreement. The community benefit agreement requires prevailing wage. It requires apprenticeships. We just talked yesterday about apprenticeships and how we want that to be part of what we're doing. It requires healthcare, those kinds of things. My additional conversations with ABC is that they feel like they can work with it. I think they have a couple of tweak language suggestions. They can speak to if they think it raises the cost. I think that what we have found is that that generally the agreements are designed to make sure that the financial benefits are going to the community and that they're not sort of contractors coming in from out of state, as we've discussed, so that if we're going to invest our money, federal money, state money, tax money, rate money, it's going to have the multiplier effect within our own communities. You see the community benefit agreement also, for example, talks about hiring returning citizens, right? Like talks about hiring, I think veterans, minorities, like it's focused on this kind of broadly. How do we make sure as we invest large sums of money, it's always helping improve the local community where that money is also being invested?
All right, seeing no further questions, that concludes this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. So I apologize as we're kind of working off an incomplete list here. I have Chair Hoover, Joel Novi. Oh, I apologize. Is Ben here, sir? Yes. Yep, Ben, come on up. And I think that is it for the favors. Anybody else here for favorable? Charles, you want to go again?
Vice Chair Crosby, members of the Economic Matters Committee. I'm Chair Fred Hoover, the Maryland Public Service Commission, testifying for a favorable report on House Bill 397. We support this bill because geothermal is a unique energy source. It's sort of the, kind of forgotten energy source. And we've talked about the need to diversify the sources of energy that helps heat our homes and do things like that. And when I was at the Maryland Energy Administration, we actually created a grant program to incentivize individuals creating geothermal systems for their houses, because we found that there was a lot of geothermal resources within the state of Maryland. And it not only created a new heating source for people's houses, but it actually created a lot of jobs for the well driller industry. This is a little different, and it's that way a little more complicated, because this would be more as was talked about, a network utility type function using geothermal as the source. It's our thought that having this as a pilot program can provide some useful lessons for us going forward. And let me talk about one issue that came up before, which I guess is this question of if it goes south, who winds up holding the bag? And there's actually a precedent for that. A few years ago, the General Assembly passed a energy storage pilot program, which required the utilities to present to the Public Service Commission energy storage pilot projects, one of which they owned, one of which was an outside contract situation. They filed those projects and we approved a number of them. They had to have a cost benefit analysis, but there was language within that proposal, within that law, that gave us the ability to review the actions by the utility and under the standard process that we use for determining what is considered to be a prudent activity and an imprudent activity. And one of the things that happened with that particular pilot program, which was more just sort of bad timing than anything else, was COVID, the war in Ukraine caused all sorts of problems in acquiring the equipment for the storage projects. And a lot of the projects wound up being delayed before they were put into place. But the Public Service Commission has reviewed on a regular basis the applications by the companies for the money they've spent on these projects, the time to get them on board. And the General Assembly ultimately passed a law to make the storage project, pilot project, a permanent program. And we're now in the process of setting up rules and regulations to implement storage projects across the state. As I mentioned earlier, I think being careful on how we implement this particular pilot program along the lines of the comments made by BG&E, this can be a success here in the state of Maryland. I think we should take our time with it, learn the lessons from the other states, Massachusetts and New York, before we move forward on it. But the heating source itself is a unique and a useful heating source for the state. And with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
We have lots. No. And I'll let DFH know you were pumping up his bill. Oh, there I knew no comment. All right, seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Got out of here easy today, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right, we will turn to the favorable with amendments. Hadley Anthony, Alex Pavlak, Joyce Lombardi, and Eric Kaufman. Is anybody else here favorable with amendments? All right, go ahead when ready.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Hadley Anthony, Government Relations Officer at the Maryland Department of the Environment, testifying in support with amendments on House Bill 397. This bill aligns with Maryland's climate goals to reach 60% greenhouse gas reductions by 2031 and to reach net zero emissions by 2045. With so many emerging clean energy technologies, it is important that we keep investing in these opportunities. And network geothermal is one of those opportunities that offers a potential that can have a large positive impact on greenhouse gas reductions. It makes sense to have a pilot to further explore this heating and cooling technology. This bill will also help support the work that MDE is doing on environmental justice, prioritizing overburdened and underserved communities. It is important, I think, that MDE supports the bill with the amendments provided by the Maryland Energy Administration, and MDE asks for a favorable with amendments report for House Bill 397. I thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Crosby, members of the committee. I'm Joyce Lombardi. I'm from the Maryland Energy Administration. With me today is our Director of Programs, Eric Kaufman. You do have our testimony, which is favorable with amendments. And so I understand that there are, in fact, new amendments. And so that kind of cuts through my testimony just a little bit. But I do want to say this. We wholeheartedly support this bill and a network geothermal pilot in Maryland, especially one as here that's taking advantage of new federal money. We commend Delegate Charkutian for her work and her vision on this bill. I had the honor of going with her to Massachusetts and seeing some of these pilots, kind of looking into New York. And so the goals of this bill, which is to protect ratepayer interests and taxpayer interests, and to accelerate the goals of targeted electrification and do so in low and moderate income communities, we absolutely support and commend your vision. You do have our written testimony, which we were concerned the way originally as structured, but there is a great deal of uncertainty with some of the federal credits. Her amendments, she's worked very hard to alleviate those. We're happy to answer any more questions on those. And you see with our amendments before, it was kind of going into the heart of that cost uncertainty and to cap it. Under the new amendments, we did just get those, and we are sure that we can get to the place and work with the sponsor and work with everyone else on this bill so that they have the ratepayer protections that we like. We are here to answer questions on the federal funding, any of the costs, anything you have, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Eric Kaufman, Division Director, Energy Programs for the Maryland Energy Administration. I am here along with Lombardi to answer any questions you may have, particularly relating to the potential implementation.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Pavlak. I'm a PhD engineer from Severna Park and the chair of the Future of Energy Initiative. I spent my career building things, and I earned a reputation in the in the eighties, creating innovative systems for the Pentagon. In my world, whenever we build something new, something always goes wrong. We've even have a rule or a law, Murphy's Law, that says if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and you need to plan for it. So we tend to be very conservative in how we lay out programs. My initial reaction to this bill is, and apparently I have a very early draft. My initial reaction was too big, too soon. Where's the evidence that this has any that geothermal will be competitive with air source heat pumps? You have two different technologies can do the same job. Is there any hope that this will be cost competitive with air source heat pumps, particularly on retrofits? And I still haven't seen any data along those lines. I was concerned initially about the apparent scope, at least in the version I had it. I read it as $100 million investment on part of Maryland. I am very much in support of looking at the technology of limited scale pilots. I think that is Maryland's role in all this, is limited scale pilots. Listening to the testimony here alleviates a lot of my concerns. The one thing I point out is I don't see a program office for this. Who is responsible for making this work? Is it the Economic Matters Committee? Open question, but that's the extent of my testimony. My written testimony is basically limit the scope of it and look at doing your homework before you make large commitments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, we appreciate your questions and your testimony. I mean, I would just say, sir, we built roads and we studied those. That wasn't a pilot, right? Now they bank, we have guardrails, et cetera. So I didn't really follow the logic there, but thank you so much. All right, that concludes this panel. Now we'll go to the unfavorables. Jeff Ferguson and Tommy Thompson. Is Jeff here?
He is not, Mr. Chair. I will handle the testimony for both.
You don't get 4 minutes, Tommy.
I know. Good afternoon, Thomas Thompson, on behalf of both the Maryland Minority Contractors Association as well as the Associated Builders and Contractors. I first want to thank the sponsor of the bill. She did reach out to us in early December and was able to work out some of our concerns then. But there are some remaining concerns that we have highlighted to her, and she is working with us to formulate amendments that will make the bill more palatable to us. But I will speak to those two pieces. The first is found on page 4, lines 11 through 14. That talks about a 21st century labor management approach. That has no meaning in the industry, nor does it have meaning under law. And so to avoid any confusion or any litigation in the future, we are asking that portion to be stricken. The National Labor Rights Act conveys those rights to organize and to collectively bargain, and they exist whether that's in this law or not. So we would ask that respectfully be stricken. The second part is with the MBE requirements. We think they can actually be stronger and more meaningful, and that's our main concern in speaking to this committee today. I think as we establish what the utility companies should do when developing these, and they reach out to contractors outside their unionized workers, that they should be inclusive of minority business enterprises. We shouldn't have simply language in there that's kind of like, well, we're going to try to do it, or we're going to do whatever allowable under the Constitution. All these laws that you pass should conform to the Constitution, but we should be establishing real executive plans to include these businesses in the construction of emerging technologies and industries. That's all we're asking. We provided language to that regard, and I know that the sponsor is conscious of not only the equity of the consumer, but the equity of the contractor. We've spoken many times about that, and I believe that we will find language together to make that work, and with that, our concerns should be assuaged. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure we're waiting on an AG opinion for that one. All right. Seeing no questions, that concludes this bill hearing. You don't have anybody else, right? I don't have anybody else. Did I miss anybody? Just because I'm operating off of like half the pages. Okay. Charles, are you favorable on this next one? Yeah. Next, we'll go to House Bill 505. Again, Delegate Charkoudian. I have your panel as Clara Summers, Matthew Casper, and David Lapp. Do you want to come up here and sit for moral support, Charles?
Just have to keep everyone on their toes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Delegate Lord Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 505. So this is the Utility Transparency and Accountability Act. And so I think you might recall that last year we learned more about PJM, which is our regional transmission operator. And specifically what we've talked about is that PJM controls the transmission planning, the interconnection, generation planning. And I think that you probably also know that we have some really big decisions that are really big issues that are coming in this state as a result of PJM decisions. And so what happens or doesn't happen at PJM matters in terms of our clean energy transition. It matters in terms of how much our ratepayers are going to pay, how much transmission we're going to have to build, and how much we can, and it matters in terms of reliability. So as much as we think, and we are passing energy policy for the state, a lot of our energy policy either gets facilitated by or stymied by what happens at PJM. So for this reason, it's really important that we have an understanding of what it is that's happening at PJM. And the votes at PJM and the people, the companies and the organizations that are deciding things at PJM are utilities, incumbent utilities. They are generators. There's a very small role for people's councils and people's advocates. And even our Public Service Commission and our MEA doesn't have a voting role at PJM. They have an advisory role through OPSI at PJM, but they don't have a voting role. So the folks actually taking the votes are primarily, and the most of the votes are the incumbent utilities, transmission operators, and generators, with a handful of votes for some of the people's at people's councils, and they'll talk about their role in a minute. This bill relates to the fact that a lot of discussion and decisions get made at the lower level committees before they go to the higher membership level committee. Once things get to the membership level committee, you can see agendas, you can see votes that are taken, you can see proposals that are taken, but what actually gets to that public place is either supported or shut down at the lower level committees. And the lower level committee votes are not published. And so what that means is our utilities that have a monopoly franchise in Maryland, in order to operate in the public interest, are taking votes at PJM that may or may not be in the public interest. It is possible that they're taking votes that are in the public interest. We have no way of knowing that. They may be taking votes that are purely in their shareholders' interests, and we would never know that because these are not public votes. I want to give one quick example of why we should care. One of the things that we're facing right now is that Brandon Shores is about to shut down. That has significant reliability impacts in the BG&E region. Brandon Shores shutting down is partly related to the fact that we are not able to bring new energy generation on fast enough. Because of the PJM interconnection queue, we've been delayed in bringing on new generation, delayed in bringing on new clean generation. And so we have a coal-fired power plant that is about to be paid to stay on, paid as much as they want in what's called reliability must run. That's our ratepayers who are going to pay those costs to keep coal online because PJM failed miserably at transmission planning and at bringing on new generation and new clean energy. And we have to now have BG&E and Exelon build as quickly as possible $800 million of transmission from Peach Bottom into the Brandon Shores area. Now, if you listen to that scenario, PJM's systems led to that problem that, lo and behold, is going to benefit Brandon Shores, the generator, and BG&E, the transmission owner. Who's making the decisions of PJM rules that led to that point? Well, it turns out BG&E, Exelon, Pepco, all the Exelon companies, and the generators. So we have the companies that are making the decisions somewhat in the dark that we don't get to see that are leading to these outcomes that are keeping fossil fuel plants on for longer and building massive amounts of generation at a benefit to their shareholders. Now, I'm not saying we don't need that. Massive amounts of transmission. I'm not saying we don't need that transmission. We do. We absolutely have to build that. But what I'm saying is we find ourselves in these places that are PJM outcomes that are financially benefits to the companies that are taking the votes, that are setting those rules, and we don't get to see how they're taking those votes. This bill changes that. Panel will talk more about that. I want to talk about two other pieces that are in this bill. One is the requirement that our utilities are in the RTO. Now, that might sound funny because I just got through criticizing PJM, and I do criticize PJM and the governance structure that's currently there, but RTOs are actually good things. They help us keep the lights on. They help us share energy with our neighbors, and overall, they can be beneficial to our clean energy transmission. So we do want our utilities to be in RTOs, but specifically, FERC wants our utilities to be in RTOs so much that they're willing to charge our ratepayers more money to keep them in the RTOs. And so what this section of the bill does by requiring that our utilities are in the RTOs is it makes it so that the state is requiring it so they don't get the bonus money from our ratepayers. So we actually end up saving money, potentially right now, 20 million a year for our ratepayers, and more as this 800 million and other transmission gets built for the data centers. Finally, the last thing that this bill does is it limits ratepayers, the use of ratepayer funds for lobbying and influencing policy. As thrilled as I was to have Charles sitting next to me on the last bill, as devastated as I am to have him sitting against me on this bill, either way, our captive ratepayers shouldn't be paying for that. And right now, we already have one line in Maryland law that says that they shouldn't be paying for that. And what this bill does is it gives more teeth to that. It gives more specifics to that. What do we mean by influencing policy? And how do we know that they're not influencing policy with ratepayer money? It adds some reporting. And so we'll have, Matt will talk more about that. So with that, I'll stop and pass it on to some of my expert panel members. In fact, I'll have Claire, if you want to start talking about PJM transparency.
Sure. Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Clara Summers, and I am the Consumers for a Better Grid campaign manager, which is a project of the Citizens Utility Board of Illinois. I'm testifying in support of HB 505 and have also submitted written testimony. Consumers for a Better Grid is a watchdog holding grid operators, such as PJM, accountable to consumers, states, and a clean, affordable energy future. So imagine if all of the committee votes here in the Maryland General Assembly were secret and only the votes of the state Senate were reported in full. Such a process, I think you would agree, would lack critical transparency and be undemocratic. The PJM stakeholder process is one such process. The issues there affect electric reliability, rates, and the clean energy transition, but the votes are not transparent. Examples, just a few examples of issues considered in the lower level committees or senior task forces over the past few years include residential demand response participation, how new resources connect to the grid, and the MOPR-X proposal on state policy resources that many of you may be familiar with. So you may hear that PJM meetings are public, but that's not in the way General Assembly meetings are. In order to attend one of the more than 400 annual stakeholder meetings, you need to register for an account, which is a multi-step process. And keep in mind that none of these meetings are recorded. Even if you're present when a vote is taken at one of these lower level committees or senior task force meetings, you will not know how individual firms voted, even if you're present. There is also the potential for abuse of market power in PJM, because holding companies may be able to vote several times on an issue through their affiliates who can vote in lower level committees and senior task forces. That means certain companies can have outsized influence on which proposals advance. HB 505 would shine a much needed light on votes by electric utilities, and we urge a favorable report on HB 505 and thank Delegate Charkoudian for her leadership.
Do you want to go next? Because you got PJM stuff, and then we'll go to that.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee, David Lapp again for the Office of People's Counsel. We support HB 505 because it will help Maryland utility customers. Effective utility regulation requires visibility into what utilities are doing, how they spend money, and what is being charged to ratepayers. That regulation is necessary because utilities are not subject to the accountability that a competitive market brings. Our office represents customers in matters before the Public Service Commission, as well as before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and we're engaged on a daily basis in the activities of the Regional Transmission Organization, PJM. This bill is needed for Maryland to better understand the position of Maryland utilities at PJM, as well as to ascertain whether utilities are properly allocating costs to customers. We've been engaged in Brandon Shores and other huge cost issues for Maryland customers, and we're litigating some of those at FERC. The cost recovery provisions in reporting will identify costs that can be buried in big buckets and hard to identify, especially in the context of time-constrained rate cases where there are much bigger dollar items demanding attention. We have one case that we've been looking into costs that is now entering into its third year. The PJM voting transparency provisions will enable everyone, including legislators, to better understand the utilities' positions. The bill's requirements for regional RTO participation, we estimate will benefit customers about 20 million annually in the coming years. You're going to hear from opposition numerous arguments about why the bill is unnecessary or perhaps even why it's contrary to federal law. Keep in mind that these are public utilities, not comparable to other businesses operating in. Preemption is not an issue. We'll be happy to answer any questions here or following the hearing. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Vice Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Matt Casper. I'm the Deputy Director of the Energy and Policy Institute. EPI is a national utility research and watchdog organization. My colleagues and I focus our research efforts on monopoly utility companies and their political influence activities. EPI joins a coalition of over 24 organizations supporting HB 505. It will protect customers and help Maryland achieve its emission reduction goals. First, by disallowing utilities from spending customer money on political influence activities, along with other costs that do not impact these companies from serving customers, we can ensure that ratepayers are not funding utility advocacy, including actions that slow down the clean energy transition. One specific instance that is happening right now is that Maryland utility customers are contributing to the budget of the American Gas Association. AGA staff and expenses have gone towards fighting state efforts to reduce emissions from the building sector, weakening building codes, and funding misinformation campaigns centered around electric heat pumps. Second, HB 505 will allow legislators, regulators, interveners in rate cases, and customers easily and efficiently ensure with their own eyes that utilities are not spending money on political influence activities. Connecticut passed a similar policy last year, and the required disclosures and disallowances there have helped the Office of Consumer Counsel include in its direct testimony in a recent rate case recommendations to remove $319,000 from being charged to customers. This bill does not prohibit a utility company from engaging in political activities. It instructs utilities and regulators to ensure that those expenses come from their profits, not from customer accounts. We urge a favorable report on HB 505.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Why only the utility? Why aren't you trying to look into suppliers, transmission? Why are you singling them out?
So the utilities own transmission and distribution.
Sure.
And they are they're a monopoly that's a regulated monopoly. And so they have a guaranteed profit and they have ratepayers who are captured, right? Like you can't pick another distribution utility.
Understandable.
And
probably my follow-up question to why about the broad political activities, but go ahead.
Right. So I think the issue is that if you have a retail supplier, right, like you have NRG's retail supplier, if you don't like their political activity, then you can find another retail supplier. Same with your coffee shop and anything else. If you don't like Pepco's, BG&E's political positions on things, you can't select another one, right? So they have a monopoly, you're captured.
So this is why you're targeting the utility specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the broad-based accusation of political influence. Aren't they overseen by FERC, which is a federally regulated body? Don't they have in those bodies and accountable to Congress and ethics commissions and, just like we are here at the House of Delegates.
So there's a couple things. So the utilities in Maryland, BG&E, Pepco, Delmarva Power are accountable to the Public Service Commission. So it's a PSC that regulates them. And Exelon and cross-jurisdictional, sort of efforts, there are elements of transmission that goes across state lines that's regulated by FERC. So there's a couple different parts to the bill, but the parts that are sort of within the state related to the ratepayer funds being used for lobbying or influencing policy. That is actually already in Maryland law. It's just that it is one sentence in Maryland law. There's not a lot of detail about what we mean by that. And so it's sort of been the precedent that we have said we don't want captured ratepayer money to be used for lobbying. What's different about this bill is we are explicit about what we mean by that, and we require reporting so that it's easier for the PSC and the People's Council and others to be sure that that's the case.
Okay, thank you. Let me, one more. I'm sorry. So this is a committee. That the PJM is a committee. What is the percentage of the vote of the utility of that committee? I mean, you're singling them out.
So, sorry. Okay.
It
Now
sounds like it's a much.
We're talking about two different things, but yeah,
Right.
let's talk about, so in terms of PJM, the percentage of the regulated utilities that are within PJM, do you know what that number is? The total
No, I don't know. And it's also divided up by sector.
So I guess what I'm getting at is how much influence
Yeah.
the utility actually has. It doesn't sound like there's actually.
Well, it's significant because the groups of people who are represented at PJM are transmission operators, which is the
Which
utilities.
you're not regulating.
No, that's us.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. It's not. So
Okay.
that's what we're talking about. That's this
Just
bill.
utilities, okay.
That's the utilities. And then you have generators. So
Mhm.
that's like the, GenOn and Energy.
Which that's what this. bill
That's
doesn't-
not in this bill.
That's not in this bill.
Because again, they're not regulated by the state. So this is we can get at this piece, we can't get at this piece. And then the public advocates, right? Like the Office of People's Council,
Mhm.
very small part of it. Good, good.
Yes.
Well, that's okay. I'm just talking to
But you wanna
addressing the
tell
delegate. No, we can
Do I
take a
miss anything?
breath. We have other questions and it's probably a lengthy hearing.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get at the heart of what the actual influence of the utility is over this.
Yeah, so I think that there's 14 states and each of those get one vote of their People's Council, right? Whereas like Exelon has, because they have, 4 subsidiaries in Maryland and a couple subsidiaries in Illinois and a couple subsidiaries somewhere else. So Exelon ends up with almost as many votes as the People's Council across this entire region. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So Exelon's utilities end up with almost as many votes as People's Councils across the 14 states.
Okay.
But related to that, I think it's a great question because if just Maryland did it, it would be meaningful, but we actually have similar legislation pending in Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and Illinois. So if all of those states do it, or if over the next few years, all of those states do it, it actually starts to make a really meaningful shift in the overall, not just the transparency of our utilities, but also the overall transparency of the body.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
All right, let's take that breath. Chris, or Delegate Adams, sorry.
There you go. I'm counting in relief, Seth. David, I got a question for you. The Office of People's Council, as I'm thinking about your charge and your mandate, and that has been adjusted. So let's just say when I first came in 10 years ago, OPC did a thing. Now there's a bit of a divergence from what we originally did, which is advocate for the ratepayer, especially those that are least able to afford. So here's my question for you. If this bill passes and you're sending letters on your letterhead that report on votes where a decision was made that improved reliability and cost, but frankly at the expense of renewable goals, okay? How are you going to respond to that? Like, what are you going to do with the vote totals? How are you going to distill that and communicate your office's position on these kind of decisions?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but what we don't know is how I mean, we are one of 14 consumer advocate states or, that have a role at PJM. The transmission owners have some 80 votes. So
I'm asking.
we're focused on, this is a consumer issue. And this is about like the Brandon Shores transmission. We filed a protest at FERC because of the high cost to Maryland customers as a result of the failure of PJM to anticipate the retirement of that plant, which was foreseeable. And we have been engaged in trying to push PJM to do planning further in advance, because last summer we predicted ourselves. I did a presentation before the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners of upcoming plants that we thought were going to retire. 2 of those plants retired in the subsequent months following that presentation. We were able to anticipate those plants retiring because the writing is on the wall. And yet, because PJM did not anticipate them, or they didn't act, because they don't act until they get a deactivation notice, which in turn triggers a series of events that end up costing Maryland ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars over time. And so we're very engaged in trying to push PJM to think ahead a little bit so that customers don't get sacked with all these costs, because that PJM treats it as I'm trying not to get too much in the weeds. I'm happy to talk offline, but there are paths forward that can use competition to procure the transmission requirements, that can look at alternatives to these massive transmission buildouts that are hugely profitable for the transmission owners, which control the decision-making at PJM.
So you've answered a scenario. It's not the scenario I'm putting in front of you, and it might be an oversimplification, but I'm on the bill, which is asking that these votes become public. What I'm saying is, will Office People Council review the votes and say, okay, in this scenario, these providers that are regulated made decisions or votes for reliability purposes and or to keep costs down purposes, and did it at the expense of renewable energy. And I think that this is sort of the juxtaposition of your role now, because you have 2 roles. There's this environmental justice component. There's also, you represent the people, right? The ratepayers. And my guess is a lot of these votes is what this bill is getting to. So David, the question really comes down to, how do you reconcile your role in this with a bill that's going to throw data and information your way for which you will surely want to opine on? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, we are first and foremost the ratepayer advocate. Just like the Public Service Commission. I mean, we can't ignore what state policy is, and that's essentially what the statute says. But we are first and foremost the ratepayer advocate, and that's going to be that is our priority, and that is going to continue to be our priority in our office.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
I'm just trying to understand page 3. You say what public service company may not recover through rates. So I'm not understanding why, like membership dues and stuff like that to Edison Electric Institute or someplace like that. I certainly think they have a benefit to the utility.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I actually am working on amendments for that section, because there's really sort of 2 different kinds of membership groups. So there's groups like EPRI, who do more technical support, research, that kind of stuff. And I think that that's probably appropriate to allow in the recovery. And there's groups like the American Gas Association, who primarily do, I mean, they certainly do presentations and research and whatnot, but they do, trainings on how to do advocacy. That's what their training is focused on. They do a lot of advocacy themselves at the federal level, at the state level. And so those would be ones that are really trying to influence policy. And that's what, again, because it's influencing a specific policy outcome, that's what would be exempt. So I need to, this is too broad and I need to work on an amendment, but that's kind of the distinction in my mind.
Okay, and then the other one, or maybe that's your amendment too, like it says you can't recover anything that creates goodwill towards a public service company. I mean, so they technically couldn't sponsor a little league and have that recovered in rates. I assume something like that would be covered by that definition.
Yeah.
Is that intentional?
Yeah, I mean, there's a question about like, why do we want? What, I mean, there's a question.
I'm kind of feeling bad for the little sluggers, you know?
Well, let me clarify. Let me clarify. All of these things can be paid for. It just has to come out of shareholder
I
profits
get that.
instead
It's
of
below
capture
the
rate.
line. Yeah, I
So
totally
like
understand.
if Washington Gas wants their name on the Little League enough, then their shareholders ought to cough that up. Like, why should you have to pay for that? If you're gonna pay for that, why shouldn't it say Wyville supports
You
this?
know, I
Little
pay
League? You
for
know
it
what I'm
when I
saying?
go to Walmart because they advertise, right? So,
But you get to you get to choose.
the
You
other
get to
thing
choose there.
they do that potentially creates goodwill, I mean, you get that bill insert every month where if you want to contribute to like a community fund or help support low-income taxpayers or ratepayers and stuff like that. So is that also, would that be excluded from being recovered in rates because it potentially creates goodwill?
I don't think that the insert that says, do you want to contribute towards the local warmth fund or whatever it might say is, would be considered promoting the organization. But if there's a concern that it does, then I could clarify that putting an insert in that lets you help your neighbors, you know, isn't considered that.
All right, thank you.
All right, real quick, I don't believe they can cover for lobbying rates already, correct?
Correct.
Right.
What this
Okay.
does is it clarifies what we mean by that.
Oh, I'm aware of what this thing does, but yeah. All right, I'll just let it go. Okay, thank you. I don't see any more favorable. We'll now turn to the unfavorable. We have Ann Clace, Charles Washington, and Jennifer Walker.
Ready? Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Ann Clace here in opposition to House Bill 5, or Ann Clace here on behalf of Pepco and Delmarva Power in opposition to House Bill 505. So House Bill 505 is based on the notion that utilities are not transparent when it comes to recovery of expenditures or votes taken at PJM. However, the very nature of being in a highly regulated industry means utilities are scrutinized every time they go in for a rate case at the PSC. The PSC has the jurisdictional responsibility for setting rates for utilities in Maryland and can, and often do, ask for the exact financial information that is included in House Bill 505 when deliberating potential rate increases for utilities. House Bill 505 singles out one industry as it places additional burdens on Maryland utilities that are not applicable to other industries participating in the exact same activities as we are, such as voting at PJM or the lobbying activities described in House Bill 505. Finally, Pepco and Delmarva Power are concerned about the legal implications of this legislation, as we believe it, if not all of it, is preempted by the federal law that governs the transmission of electricity across the United States. For the reasons stated above, Pepco and Delmarva Power respectfully request an unfavorable report on House Bill 505. Happy to take any questions.
Good afternoon, Chair Crosby, members of the committee. Charles Washington here on behalf of BGE in opposition to House Bill 505. I echo Ms. Clace's perspective that the processes that this bill seeks to change are already completely transparent, that the legislation's attempts to modify those are either preempted, unconstitutional, or simply unnecessary. You've heard a lot here today that makes it sound like these processes are being done in a black box. It's simply not true. I'm trying to think about how I can get to the things I'm supposed to talk about when I really want to respond to what you heard. I'll say this. PJM has this fact sheet on their website. You can go and you can see answers to questions about whether we have voting power in PJM. You can see how easy it is to take advantage of being at the meeting, either electronically or in person. You'll see that this is a fully transparent process. A particular concern is the attempt in this bill to compel membership into PJM. And I want to be clear, BGE is voluntarily a member of that regional transmission organization, and we don't need legislation to tell us the benefits of being a member. But voluntary membership was always the intent. The Federal Power Act calls for federal regulators to divide the country into regional districts for voluntary interconnection and coordination for generation and transmission. The DC Circuit Court recently concluded that that statutory language bars even federal regulators from mandating RTO membership. Instead, federal law asks that utilities be incentivized to be members of transmission organizations. This provision that's tucked into the final page of the bill really isn't about transparency. We're members and everyone knows that is an attempt to make our company less financially stable. And we oppose that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Walker, and I am the principal.
Ma'am, real quick, I don't want to just slide that a little bit closer to your mouth.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, would you allow me to introduce
Sure,
Jennifer
Charles.
Walker, who is not a lobbyist, but is here at my request? I just did.
Okay, good. Thank you. Can you hear me better? Okay, good. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Walker, as Charles just said, and I am the Principal Transmission Development and Strategy representing Exelon in opposition of House Bill 505. I'd like to use my time to explain what the PJM process is and what it is not. PJM is an RTO formed at the approval of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. PJM coordinates the movement of wholesale electricity over 13 states in the District of Columbia. The purpose of an RTO like PJM is to promote economic efficiency, regional energy grid reliability, and non-discriminatory wholesale energy markets. PJM is federally regulated. PJM holds over 400 stakeholder meetings annually. These meetings are open to the general public, including the media, and are accessible both in person and virtually, as Charles noted. The lower level committees, which are comparable to the energy working groups we see in Maryland, are comprised of subject matter experts who meet to provide recommendations to the members committee, the senior committee that takes final votes on matters. Agendas and materials for these meetings are published in advance. The lower level committees gain consensus among participants by taking a vote for alignment that will ultimately go before the members committee for a vote. All votes cast at the members committee are published in a voting report that is shared publicly. PJM is overseen by a board of managers who do not have any affiliation or financial interest with any PJM member. FERC has ultimate oversight over all PJM processes and procedures. So claiming that there is a lack of transparency is simply not valid. In fact, lower level committees in the lower level committee meetings, the PSC and the OPC have representatives who attend. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the PJM processes. We respectfully request an unfavorable vote on HB 505. Thank you.
Delegate Howard.
Vice Chair, very quickly, can you distribute that to the committee members? That would be great.
Absolutely. We'll have them hand delivered and emailed tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And ma'am, in the center, you talked about them being straight live streamed.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how long they've been live streamed? And the reason I'm asking is because it was an absolute uphill battle to get our floor debates live streamed. So I'm interested to see how long those would have been live streamed.
Probably before COVID. I can't give you an exact date, but certainly since COVID, it's been a lot more virtual options than in the past.
But you've had the availability to live stream for
a number of years.
Okay,
That's
thank
correct.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on Mr. Washington, your testimony. So what I'm hearing is that a bill like this would ultimately cause ratepayers' rates to go up because, you know, while you are a regulated utility, you still have to make a profit and you can't just operate in a vacuum. So it would cost more to everyone.
Yeah, I think a bill like this would do a lot of harm to our customers. You know, one of the things that was asked already was about organizations like EEI and AGA and why the works of those organizations should be recovered in rates. Both of those groups, whether you like electricity or you like gas or you like neither, they delineate lobbying expenses and we already do not recover those in rates. But the other things that those organizations do is they allow members to share technologies, to share best practices, to get together, get the engineers together and talk about products that they're using that don't work and prevent the next utility from buying them, contractors who do a poor job. And so when you look at, you know, I could point to, if we had the time, many elements of this bill that really cause much more harm than it does good. And it's the reason why, you know, on my outbound, I just didn't know where to go because there's so much to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find Ms. Enclay's argument interesting, which is how you feel this is singling out one particular industry, right? And then I recall the bill sponsor saying the reason she's introducing this bill is because this is a different kind of industry, which is like a regulated monopoly, and people will have no choices in that space. So how do you respond to that? I just want to make sure, you know, we are.
Sure. And thanks for the question. Yeah. I mean, I guess the response to that is, you know, at PJM, we have, as Delegate Tarkoudian said, we have electric distributors, end use customers, generation owners, other suppliers, transmission owners. So that's 5 different sectors that are voting. There's, I would say, hundreds of Maryland companies that are voting at PJM that have a vested in that. I guess we should all have a vested interest in how they're voting. So why are we the only ones that have to share, that are being asked to share votes when, I mean, essentially, I would imagine everybody would be interested in how all of these companies are voting.
Yeah, just to add kind of just some figures to that, and this is the fact sheet we will distribute to you. You'll see that there are over 500 voting members of PJM, 13 are transmission owners. And so when we talk about transmission owners being able to overwhelm the vote, it's simply not true. While one transmission owner might have more than one vote, we don't have 500 votes. And so all those other parties would have the opportunity to see how we vote. We would not have the opportunity to see how they vote. And that's, I think, kind of where Ms. Clace is going.
Real quick on that logic, though, wouldn't you be in the room to see how they voted?
We'd be in the, sorry, you should answer that question.
Yeah, Jennifer Walker, you could see who votes if you're watching the online stream. So, and I will say the members committee is the top committee where votes are taken, and those votes are published and they're on the PJM website. Anyone can go there and look at it, and anyone can actually join any meeting. You don't have to have a PJM account. So it is very transparent.
I guess that brings me to another question though, then, right? If it's already published, you can already get it, then what's the big deal if we include that? Like, why are we?
There are lower level committee collaborations that occur. And the idea is we want to do a whiteboard session. We want to get everybody together to throw ideas on the table so that we can come up with proposals that ultimately go up to the members committee. And we don't want to chill that conversation and that deliberation. So votes don't occur in some of the lower level committees. Some of the lower level committee votes do occur, but then they ultimately go up to the members committee and you could participate in those meetings.
Right. I guess what I was really just trying to get there is like, we're using the overarching one and saying everything's transparent and the bill deals with something lower. And so you're trying to argue one thing that is one way and trying to apply it to the other. And I don't know that, I mean, like that part of the bill, that part of the bill flew out of this House last year. So like, I don't know that there's much rub on the transparency portion of it in this bill. So Delegate Tarkoudian.
Wanted to clarify, are the live streamed 400 meetings a year that if I had time, I could just spend my entire life watching PJM stakeholder meetings? I know people think that's what I do, but it's not. Are those recorded so I could go back later to see a vote?
Not that I know of.
I didn't think so. Okay. So Charles, what you said a minute ago was everyone else would be able to see how you vote, but why don't, if everyone else is interested in how you vote, why don't they all watch the 400 meetings themselves to see how you voted in those?
Well, the people that we're talking about are in those meetings, right? I was talking about the other voters and how we are disadvantaged compared to the other voters.
Why are you, what is it that you're hiding, I guess, is my question.
I mean, Delegate Charkoudian, there is nothing that is being hidden.
Can I ask another question?
Do you want me to answer your first question?
Well, I want to ask this first because it relates to, it relates to.
Hold on. Let him answer the first question. Go ahead. And then you can ask the next question.
So here's what I think is important to remember. What we have are procedural votes happening, and we have votes where members are kind of testing ideas with each other. I took some concern with the suggestion, for example, that on the lead up to the Brandon Shores announcement, that there were perhaps some votes that BGE or Exelon took that led to that. The votes that really matter are completely public, and you can see how the company is voting. What's happening at the subcommittee level is really collaboration. And there's nothing to hide, but it's just a collaborative process where people are working together to get to the next level.
But you can see how when you have outcomes that are so beneficial to BG&E and Exelon, and we can't see how you're voting, and you're fighting us hard to see how you're voting, it might create some suspicion. Isn't that so?
All right.
No, I don't see that. And the reason why I don't see that
You don't
is
have
that
to go
the
any
vote
further
that
into it.
actually leads to
Charles,
policy.
Charles,
I know I don't have to.
Charles,
Okay, Mr.
Charles.
Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Being chair of public utilities is fantastic. All right. Seeing no further questions, that concludes this bill hearing. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.